What if catastrophes ruled her arranged marriage? Part 4. What if the final catastrophe is choosing for herself? Duty versus desire. Freedom versus ruin. This time, Bella decides the ending. Waking up had never been so hard. Bella felt wretched. Everything hurt and her head felt as if it was full of cotton. Somewhere she heard a soft but annoying beeping. It took her a few moments to realize that it was sound of a heartbeat. Most likely her own. Seems that I'm at a hospital and still alive. That is somehow surprising. Slowly Bella's brain began to function, and after she'd moved her toes and fingers, she tried to swallow. That's disgusting. Her mouth tasted like something was rotting in it and her throat was as dry as the Sahara. And her teeth. Well, better not think about that. It took everything in Bella to open her eyes, and to her relief the lights were dimmed. A short inspection confirmed that she was indeed at a hospital and at ICU ward. Not surprising that. Bella gently turned her head and saw Edward sitting in a chair next to her bed. He was sleeping and looked exhausted, but he was still the most beautiful man Bella had ever seen. "Ward," Bella croaked. Her mouth and throat were too dry to speak, and the word she'd spoken was merely a whisper, but Edward nonetheless heard her. He startled awake and looked around the room. Before his eyes fell on Bella's form, and his eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Bella," he cried and carefully caressed her cheek before he kissed her. "I've been so worried. Are you in pain? Do you need anything?" It was kind of cute to see the normally so controlled man act like this, but Bella knew how he had to be feeling right now. A few months ago it had been her waiting for Edward to get better, and it had been hell. Bella smiled a little and whispered, "Water." Edward nodded and grabbed a sippy cup for adults from Bella's nightstand and helped her drink. "How foolish of me," Edward muttered. "Of course you want something to drink." "Don't worry," Bella whispered, and now, after she drank something, her voice sounded much better. "I feel like roadkill. Everything hurts but not too bad, so don't worry." Edward shook his head at that. "Sorry, no can do. It's my job to worry about you. Now more than ever. I'm going to call the nurse now." It didn't take a minute for a nurse to arrive after Edward had pushed the button. At first the nurse, a middle-aged Hispanic woman, looked questioningly at Edward, but as soon as she noticed that Bella was awake she smiled happily. "Ah, Mrs. Cullen, it's good to see that you're awake again. The doctor will be with you shortly," she promised and quickly left the room. "Thanks, Amalia," Edward called after her before he returned his attention to Bella. "You've been unconscious for 2 days, my love. You didn't want to wake up, which worried me greatly, but the doctor and the nurses were sure that everything was fine and you just needed rest." It's Sue, RPRISED Bella that she'd been out for 2 days and could understand why Edward had been worried. She just grabbed his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze as her doctor entered the room. He too appeared to be very pleased to see her awake. "Mrs. Cullen, it's a pleasure to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare. I'm Dr. Smith and am you attending doctor? Well, one of them. How are you feeling?" "Like shit, but not like I'm about to die." Quote. That made the doctor laugh. Good. You should still take something for the pain. You needn't strain yourself. Amalia will give you something as soon as we're through here." "So, did your husband tell you anything yet?" Bella shook her head lightly and was pleased to discover that the motion didn't hurt. "Only that I've been asleep for 2 days. Nothing more." "All right, then, what's the last thing that you remember?" Bella thought about that and could easily remember what had happened at the manor. She flinched lightly but answered the doctor's questions. "James broke into the house and shot the bodyguards and Miss Sophie. He tried to take me hostage, but I managed to get away. I hid until Garrett." "Yes, it was him. Until Garrett came and carried me out of the passage. After that, nothing." Edward smiled at her while he let his hand ran through her hair, and Dr. Smith nodded. "Yes, that's about it. It seems everything's there. No amnesia. Well then, let me fill in the blanks. After Mr. Sawyer carried you outside, the medics took a look at you and decided that you needed surgery and you were brought here immediately. I operated you. You Sue, FFERED, severe blood loss and have 2 broken ribs. And there is a slight concussion. The bullet injured your liver and we had to remove a small part, but that isn't too bad. Everything went well and it looks as if you can leave us in. Oh, 5 days. Bella just stared at him and tried to take everything in. James had hurt her more than she'd thought, but it was better than she'd feared. Okay. That doesn't sound too bad. I'm just happy that the bastard didn't hit something vital. Yes, you were quite lucky. Oh. After a short knock, the door opened and another doctor came in. This time as was a young woman who couldn't be older than 30. She had round curves and blonde locks. The doctor seemed to be that kind of person that could put people at ease without even trying. Ah, very good, Mrs. Cullen. This is Dr. Summers. Hi, Bella said with a small smile and wondered why there was another doctor. From what drive? Smith had told her there shouldn't be a reason for another one. Quickly, shish. E glanced at Edward to see what he was thinking about it. He didn't seem to be surprised though, and by the way he was greeting her, Bella assumed that Edward had already met Drive. Summers. Good morning, Mrs. Cullen. I'm an OB-GYN. OB-GYN. Why would I? Bella was now confused and a little scared that Dr. Summers was there. It couldn't be a good sign. Mrs. Cullen, please, calm down, the doctor said as they heard the accelerated beeping. Edward grabbed Bella's face and looked her deep in the eyes. Bella, Dr. Smith said that you would be fine and that is the truth. Please, just listen. It's nothing bad, promise. Bella searched Edward's face for some signs that he was lying, but his face was open and he looked calm. He wasn't worried, and that insight reassured Bella that nothing was wrong. She took a deep breath, wince, and tried to calm her racing heartbeat before she looked at Drive. Summers and mentioned her to continue. Mrs. Cullen, I promise everything is fine. Well, when you were brow. GHT and Dr. Smith ordered an X-ray, and it's normal procedure for any prophilic woman to be asked if she could be pregnant. When the patient is unconscious, we do a blood test to make sure. It was then that Dr. Smith contacted me. Your blood test came back positive. Bella knew what the doctor was telling her, but she kept staring at her, unable to believe what she'd heard. The gentle squeezing of her ND made Bella turn her head to Edward, and the carefully happy expression of his face was more convincing than any words could be. I'm pregnant, Bella asked quietly. Yes, my love, Edward sighed. You're pregnant and the baby is still safe. Quote, startled by the reminder of what could have happened to the baby she hadn't even known about scared Bella, and she immediately turned back to the doctors to ask if really everything was okay, but Dr. Summers didn't give her the opportunity to speak. Your husband is right. You were very lucky. The baby is absolutely fine and there should be no problems. Really? Bella whispered as tears started running down her cheeks. Yes, Mrs. Cullen. You're 8 weeks along and I'm sure your husband will be more than happy to show you the first picture of your child. Edward, anticipating her next words, had already grabbed the ultrasound picture and handed it to her without comment. Bella's hands shook as she looked at her baby. She listened attentively as Dr. Summers explained what she could see, and before long she was glowing with happiness. Yes, they had planned to wait little longer to have a child, but it was a pleasant surprise, and Edward's smile told that he was just as happy with this unexpected turn as she was. The doctors left a few minutes later, and soon after Nurse Amalia entered Bella's room and gave her something against the pain. Edward told her that the family and her friends already knew about their little miracle because Edward had wanted them to know everything. At first Bella was a little peeved that everyone had known about our baby before her, but it pleased her that Edward had treated her friends as her family. After this she wanted to ask Edward about James, but the medication made her sleepy and she drifted off before she could ask her questions. Edward smiled while he watched his wife sleep. The last 2 days had been nearly the worst of his life. Only the death of his grandfather had been worse than waiting for Bella to wake up. Edward hadn't left the hospital, but that didn't mean he wasn't aware of what was happening outside these walls. The media was going haywire and Mrs. Hensley was doing her best to keep them at bay. Luckily, She had some help from the police, but not even they could satisfy the press. No, they wanted to see Edward and hear what he had to say about it, or even better, Bella. But Edward didn't care about their wants. His wife was much more important. Everything else could wait. Sadly, not everyone agreed, and it hadn't taken long before his uncle and aunt had stormed into the hospital and demanded to speak to Edward. That had been the only time when he'd left his wife, and only because he'd wanted to avoid another scandal. John and Marianne had been, well, angry was a little too soft for their emotional state. It had wondered Edward that it'd taken them so long to bother him, but this fortunate circumstance had given him enough time to be prepared. Of course, the public embarrassment had been one of their main concerns next to James's disgrace. Marianne still believed that Edward had pushed her innocent and perfect boy to do these horrible things. That much denial was how fascinating, but Edward didn't care what they thought. It was a fact that James had broken into the manor and shot 3 people before he tried to use Bella to get money and a way out of the country. Another fact that spoke against him was that James had attacked the SWAT team and refused to surrender. Det Green, Garrett and Jasper had promised Edward that there was no way that James would ever be a free man again. So he wasn't too worried about that. But he didn't want more of a family scandal should James's parents consider spouting their illusions to the public. Luckily, Elizabeth had taken care of that. She'd listened to everything her daughter and son-in-law had to say before she'd walked over to them and slapped Marianne across the face. His aunt had been so shocked that she could only gape at her mother while she'd said, "Stop acting like a fool." James did horrible and disgusting things, and he did them on his own accord. He's responsible for them and no one else. I dare to say you something else and you'll have to deal with me. James went against everything this family stands for, and if you don't want to be disinherited like he will be, I'd advise you to use your brain or to simply shut up. That said, she'd left the room without another word, and John and Marianne, nearly hot pink in embarrassment, had followed her example and left. Edward hadn't heard of them since then, and he was happy about that. Edward sighed as he remembered that he would have to contact Det Green so that he could talk to Bella, and he needed to call the family or they would murder him if they didn't know that Bella was awake. He quickly left the room and pulled his phone out of his pocket and sent a message to everyone who needed to know about Bella's changed status. He really wasn't in the mood to talk to everyone in person. Before he even managed to pull up Det Green's number, the first members of the family started responding to his mail. Edward ignored them all and simply called Det Green. "Green. Hello, detective. Bella is awake and fine." "That's great," Det Green answered, and it sounded as if he was really happy to hear that Bella was doing better. "When can we come and talk to her?" "At the moment she's resting, but I think it would be good if you came in about 3 hours." "Perfect. Till then." "Yes, bye." Now that was done, Edward wanted to return to his wife, but a shout stopped him. A quick look over his shoulder showed that Garrett was walking towards him. In his hands was a small basket, and Edward dearly hoped that Kate had cooked something for them. The hospital food was just disgusting. "Hello, Mr. Cullen. I just saw Nurse Amalia and she asked me to tell you that Bella would be moved to a new room in an hour." That were great news, and Edward was looking forward to finally leave the ICU, but as long as Bella had still been unconscious they hadn't wanted to move her. "That's good. I take it that you already read my message. And, please, call me Edward. After everything we've been through together, it's well." Garrett smiled at Edward's slight show of discomfort, but he didn't comment on it. "Very well, Edward, and yes, I did read your mail. It's good that Bella is finally awake. Kate sent me with some food and tea. She seems to think that the cafeteria food is poisonous. Well, she isn't wrong about that. It is horrible to hear Garrett's answering laughter felt good to Edward. The last 3 days had been too dark, and it was nice that people finally did something else than to worry and brood. "So, how's Bella?" Edward then told Garrett everything, and his bodyguard was pleased that Bella could remember everything. It would make things much easier. The 2 men talked for a little while longer before Edward returned to his chair next to Bella's bed. His wife slept for a little over an hour before and she woke up just in time for the nurses to move her to her new room. Edward dutifully carried his wife's bag and immediately put everything away before Bella demanded to know what had happened these last days. Edward, Bella complained when Edward tried to put her off. I'm well enough to listen and to ask questions. I know that Det Green will be here soon and I want to be in the know. So talk. It was really amazing that his wife could be lying in a hospital bed, recuperating from being shot, and still be in control of their marriage. It must be a gift. Okay. So, Edward told her everything up to when the SWAT team had entered the house and found the bodies of the 2 bodyguards and Miss Sophie when Bella interrupted him. I take it that the family is paying for the funerals, right? Something in her face told him that only a positive answer would be satisfying her. It once again became apparent just how good a person his wife was. Of course, Bella, he said. And I'll make sure that their families are taken care of. Miss Sophie and Hans didn't have any children, only Nico had a little daughter, but everyone was married. Don't worry though, Cullen Corp. And our family takes good care of their employees and their families, especially if something like this happens. That's good, but I still want to talk to them myself. To offer commiserations. Bella looked sad as she said that, and Edward could understand why it was so important to her. I understand. I already talked to them myself. Sadly, you won't be able to attend the funerals. They'll be tomorrow and the day after. Myself and a few others will be attending though. Bella didn't look like she liked that, but she knew she wouldn't be able to attend and was relieved that some of the family would be going. It was the only right thing to do. Okay, now that that's taken care of, you can tell me about happened next. Edward, knowing better now than to try to not answer her, he continued his report. While the SWAT team searched for James, Garrett and one member of the team went to get you. James was found pretty soon, but he did. NT think surrendering was a good idea and he tried to fight his way out. Needless to say that the SWAT team didn't agree, and after a fair warning and after James shot at them, they took him down with a well-placed bullet. He got hit in the shoulder and is currently residing at a hospital. Bella opened her mouth but Edward just went on. No, he isn't here. The police didn't think that that would be such a great idea. As far as I know, the bastard is doing reasonably well. James will stay in prison until the trial starts, which should be in about 2 months. You don't need to worry about anything. Det Green, Garrett and Jasper promised me that there is no way that James won't go to prison. I don't think that he'll ever be a free man again, and that's nothing less than he deserves. Good, Bella agreed, and her face had darkened as she'd listened to the last part. I don't believe in the death sentence, but he deserves to suffer for what he did to Miss Sophie, Nico and Hans. And all that for money. She looked disgusted as she thought about that, and Edward knew that Bella couldn't understand why anyone would go that far for something that Bella didn't think was all that important. How is the situation out there? Edward grimaced a little bit, and that told Bella more than she wanted to know. Well, the media is, of course, going crazy, but so far Mrs. Hensley and the police were able to handle the situation. I don't think I need to tell you that my aunt and uncle are very pissed off, but Nana took care of them. Oh, and Victoria called. She hopes you're feeling better soon. That's nice, and I'm happy that Nana made sure your aunt and uncle wouldn't cause problems. Edward wasn't about to tell her how his grandmother had accomplished that, as it would only stress Bella, and was therefore pleased when Det Green arrived. The following 90 minutes Bella answered questions and did everything in her power to give the police everything they could need to put James behind bars. And after they were gone, the family and Bella's friends arrived in small groups, and by 8 Bella was exhausted and had fallen into a deep sleep. The day of the first 2 funerals had arrived, and Edward just knew that today would suck. Edward and Garrett had made sure that every member of the security team who wanted to attend the funerals could. He wouldn't be the one to tell anyone that they couldn't say their final goodbye to their coworker, comrade and friend. The police had offered help so that it was possible, and Edward had gratefully accepted. This morning he'd visited Bella and she had given him letters for the families. It still bothered her that she couldn't go, but even she could admit that she wouldn't be able to make it. Garrett drove the car while he and Nana sat in the backseats. Kate was also with them, but the others were taking a different car. I hope that the press has the decency to let the family grieve in peace, Elizabeth said as they neared the graveyard. I hope so, too, but it's doubtful. Edward grimaced as he said that, but he honestly didn't believe that the media would not find their way to the graveyard. And he was right. In front of the gates to the graveyard road stood reporters and cameramen who were trying to shove the competition out of the way to catch a shot of the passengers of the car. Disgusting bugs. Kate spat as she glared at the reporters. Yon agreed with her and were grateful that the police was doing everything they could to keep them out. They should be ashamed of themselves. I know, darling, Garrett murmured and threw his wife a sad look. But they don't care about the feelings of the family and friends. They want their story. That may be so, but they could have at least kept the cameras at home. They would be able to get a story without disturbing the funeral. Quote, that was certainly true, but there was nothing they could do about. After Garrett had parked the car, they walked to the gathered family and took their places. Nico's mother was nearly hysterical for the most part, but his wife somehow managed to keep calm. Tears were running down her face, but she didn't break down. Nico's little girl sat beside her mother and appeared to be somewhere else. Edward listened to the words of the minister and some of Nico's friends, but he didn't really hear them. All he could think about was that James had destroyed the lives of 3 people and altered so many more. Nothing could ever make it okay. And all this just because he wanted money and the headship of the business and the family. Staring at the casket of his bodyguard, Edward swore that James would pay for it, and if he had to bribe the judge. After Edward had paid his respect to Nico, he went to Anna. He had seen Nico's wife only on a few occasions, but these had been enough to show Edward that they had loved each other very much. Edward felt decidedly uncomfortable as he stepped up to Anna, but he wouldn't dare to not talk to her. I'm so very sorry, Anna. Before he could get out anything more, the grief-stricken mother nearly screamed at him. How dare you come here? You and your family are the reason why my son is dead. Your words mean nothing to us. Constance, please. Anna, who was still crying, managed to look embarrassed, and that made Edward feel even more wretched. Mr. Cullen isn't responsible for Nico's death. Nico knew the risks of being part of the team but loved his job, and just because he died while he was trying to protect Mrs. Cullen doesn't give you the right to be rude to him. Even if Mr. Hunter was the one who killed my husband. Edward was shocked that even though she'd every right to be angry and bitter, she was still defending him. He'd trouble swallowing when he spoke to her. I know he loved you and his little L very much, and I made sure that you and daughter are taken care of, but should you ever need anything, please contact me or anyone of the team. I promise that we'll help. Silently he handed her 2 envelopes. The one from Bella and one from the family. Anna stared at Edward unbelievingly until Elizabeth hugged her and then looked deep into her eyes. Dear, we're serious and we Cullens are people of honor. Whatever you may need, call us, and not just for money. Do you hear me? Yes, ma'am. Edward waited until Nana and the rest of their group were ready to leave, and while he stood there he looked at the faces of his family and the security team. Everyone looked devastated and most of the women had been crying at some point. I hope this asshole rots in hell, Emmett grumbled as he stepped next to his brother. You and me both, Edward agreed. It's still hard to believe that James caused this much grief and heartache. And to think that we're related to him. Rose had heard the last part when she'd wrapped herself around her husband and smiled sadly at them. I know it seems strange, but every family has at least one black sheep, and no matter what we may think, there was no I'd anticipate that James would go that far. The only one responsible for the crimes is James and only him. Edward knew that the last part was said mostly for his benefit, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow guilty for all this mess, as irrational as it may be. I guess it's time to leave. I want to go back to the hospital. Right now. He wanted nothing more than to crawl into Bella's bed and hold her close and thank the deities that he hadn't lost the person they loved the most. Sooner than Bella would have thought it was time to leave the hospital, and she couldn't be happier about it. The bed was horrible and the food even more. Luckily Kate had made sure that Bella didn't have to endure it. But before Edward could finally take her home, they had an appointment with Dr. Summer. Up until now neither Edward nor Bella had seen the baby or heard its heartbeat, but that was about to change. Bella's ribs and her stitches still hurt, but she was nevertheless nearly bouncing in her seat. Bella. Edward laughed as he put his hand on her knee to stop its movement. Please, love, calm down. Dr. Summer is going to call us in any moment now, but you're making me nervous. Well, more nervous than I already am. Bella giggled lightly and pressed a soft kiss onto his lips. I can't help it. I'm so excited. That's obvious. Dr. Summers had just stepped out of her office. Ison was smiling at the expecting parents. Well, come in. I wouldn't want to keep you waiting. Bella moved as quickly as she could and Edward followed with an indulgent smile. Before they could see their little miracle, Bella had to be waited, which was preposterous in her opinion. Luckily, they didn't need any blood from her, and after a few questions it was finally time for the ultrasound. Bella was on the table and ready in under 10 seconds, and that was pretty fast when one considered her injuries. Okay, Bella, let's have a look at your baby. Dr. Summer hummed while she searched for the little fetus. Soon she found it, and after a few buttons were pushed, Edward and Bella could hear the heartbeat of their baby. Edward, Bella, this is your little one, and as you can hear, it has a very healthy heartbeat. Oh my God. Bella was crying as she watched the monitor. Edward's hand, which was holding her own, was trembling, but he, like Bella, was smiling radiantly. That's unbelievable. Yes, I can't believe that we're going to be parents already, and that after our less than ideal start. Edward's voice trembled lightly as he said that. Bella and Dr. Summer could hear and see just how overwhelmed he was. The two women shared a smile before Bella pulled her husband down so that she could kiss him. I'm very happy, Edward. Me too, love. Dr. Summer printed them 2 pictures BEF. Or she wished them a good drive home and left them to make a new appointment. Bella had refused to go to her normal OB/GYN, and Dr. Summer was honored that Bella wanted her to attend to her. Edward Puss had the wheelchair with his wife to where Garrett was waiting for them. Luckily, the hospital had agreed to let them use the back entrance so that they wouldn't be hounded by the press. As soon as Bella saw Garrett, she nearly threw the picture of the baby at him. Look, Garrett, this is our baby. Isn't it wonderful? Garrett laughed lightly at her enthusiasm but dutifully took the picture and examined it. Although he couldn't make out very much, and Bella's help didn't change that. Congratulations again, Bella, and I'm sure that your baby will be the most beautiful ever. Bella looked incredibly pleased and proud and didn't even complain when Edward carried her into the car. Both men discreetly rolled their eyes when they were sure Bella couldn't see them out of fear for their lives. During tea, whole drive Bella chattered about what they would need to do before the baby was born, and even though Bella hated shopping, she couldn't wait to get things for their baby. When Edward pointed that oops, she just rolled her beautiful eyes and told him that that was something completely different. If you say so, my dear. Only when they drove the way up to the manor did Bella shut up, and Edward felt the change in her immediately. Gone was the carefree and happy woman, and in her place was now someone tense and wary. Garrett had also noticed the change in her behavior, and he and Edward shared a quick but meaningful look. Garrett had told him that Edward should be prepared for unusual behavior from Bella when they would return to the manor. Edward had offered Bella that they could stay at his parents' house or at some hotel until their house was ready, but Bella had refused. She knew that things could be difficult at first, but she wanted to be somewhere familiar, and even though horrible things had happened, the family home of the Cullens, it was still home and the one place that was part of their history. And it felt as if they would let James win if they abandoned the house. Edward had read to argue with her, but Bella was more stubborn than a donkey, and so he'd let it go, but he and everyone else would keep a close eye on her. If Bella showed signs that being at the manor proved to be too stressing for her, he would take her and leave. No matter what Bella would say to that. Garrett stopped then car in front of the entrance and opened Edward's door but let Edward help Bella out of the car. She hesitated for a moment but then she took a steadying breath and let Edward help her. Immediately he wrapped an arm around her waist and waited for her to take the first step. Bella looked at the building and let the emotions rush through her. Yes, she felt a little bit of weariness and she didn't look forward to enter the kitchen but the house still held many positive memories for her. Here she'd married Edward, and although she hadn't been truly happy at that time it was now one of her most treasured memories. Bella also thought of their first Christmas together and the gift Edward had given her. The way he'd told her that he loved her. Yes, despite everything it was still a special place and somehow home. Bella turned to Edward and smiled. Come on, let's go in. I'm sure Nana is already waiting for us with a late lunch. I hope Kate made some of her delicious cupcakes. She saw how Edward and Garrett relaxed and together they walked inside where Kate and Nana were in. Ed waiting for them with lunch and cupcakes. The first day back at the manor was strange. Bella refused to enter the kitchen and needed about 5 minutes until she could walk over threshold of the library. Edward was never far from her and kept asking her if she was fine, which she mostly was but his hovering was getting on her nerves. Only knowing that she hadn't been any better when Edward had just been discharged kept her from saying anything. It was a relief to finally sleep in their own bed again and Bella slept better than anyone had expected. It was over breakfast the next morning when Nana brought up a topic that surprised Edward and Bella greatly. I think I'm going to move in with your parents, Edward, but only when your home is done and you're ready to move back. Both Edward and Bella stared at her unable to speak but Nana's pointed look prompted Edward to respond. Why do you want to leave the house? Has it got something to do with what happened here? He knew his grandmother loved the manor, everyone did. Which was why he couldn't understand why she suddenly wanted to leave. Bella watched as the old lady seemed to choose her words carefully before she answered her grandson. No, it hasn't got anything to do with that. Carlisle asked me to move in with them some time ago and I think it's a good idea. Your grandfather is dead and I'm all alone here. Yes, of course I know that the staff is here but it still gets lonely sometimes. Bella understood what Elizabeth was saying. The manor was huge and it didn't have any close neighbors. She looked at Edward and saw him swallowing before he said anything. Yes, I guess you're right but what will happen to the manor then? This is our home. Elizabeth smiled gently at him and put her hand on his as she answered. I know, Edward, and we'll still come together to celebrate here but this house is simply too big for one person. I know you and Bella love it here but you want your own place and not live together with your grandmother. Edward looked like a little boy when he nodded and Bella had to suppress a smile at his cute pout. Elizabeth noticed and winked at her. Okay, Nana, but what's going to happen with it and with the staff? This is their home, too. The last sentence startled Bella but then she reminded herself that the manor had a second building where the staff's apartments were. Bella thought about it quickly but decided that Elizabeth wouldn't do anything that would throw the staff out of their homes or cost them their jobs. And Elizabeth's next words confirmed her thoughts. Don't worry, Avenue a few plans already but I want your agreement. You see, over the years people contacted us again and again and inquired if they couldn't use the estate for a photo shooting and I know that many couples would love to marry on these grounds. As long as we lived here it wasn't appropriate but now I don't see why we shouldn't agree. We could donate the money they would be paying us. It isn't as if we needed any more. Edward frowned as he thought about it and Bella feared that he would refuse. She thought Elizabeth's idea was great and would make sure that the staff had enough to do. And she most of them loved to prepare the manor for festivities. I have to say that your idea has merits, Edward saw it eventually and brought Bella back to the present. I have to agree with you that any people would love to be married here. I couldn't have thought of a more perfect place. But our personal rooms must be of limits. Of course, Edward, Elizabeth said with a happy smile. I never have let people have free range of our family home. It pleases me greatly that you like the idea. It'll give me something to do. I must admit that I was getting bored now that I didn't have Ed around anymore. Edward looked a little sad as she said that, but quickly Ed smiled at his Nana and promised her to help her, should she need it. Soon after she left the breakfast room to make some calls. Apparently some designer for wedding gowns had called her 2 weeks ago and nearly begged her to let them use the manor. It's cute seeing her so enthusiastic about something like this, Bella Co. Meant it once she was sure Elizabeth was out of hearing range. That it is, but I have to say that I never thought that Nana would be lonely here, or bored. But I guess it's understandable. I just don't want her to overdo it. Why don't you just ask Esme or Alice to help her? Alice especially would love this opportunity to organize more weddings and whatnot. Edward groaned as he heard that, but a smile on his face told Bella that he could also imagine his sister's excited scream when they told her the news. Oh yes, Alice will be over the moon. This would be a perfect arrangement for both of them. Come on then, let's call the little drama queen and tell her the good news. 10 minutes later Edward was nearly deafened by his sister's squealing, but there was no denying that he'd just given her the best present ever. The next weeks seemed to fly by, and before Bella even had a chance to take a break, it was time for them to fly out to Angela's and Ben's wedding. Luckily Bella's injuries were now mostly healed and she and Edward were looking forward to leave the city and all the noisy reporters. Bella had hoped in her infinite naivety that by now the media would have lost their interest in them. Sadly, that wasn't the case. More than once had Edward returned from work cursing the reporters and their thrice damned fucking cameras. Bella hadn't left the estate more than a handful of times and therefore hadn't had to deal with them too much. Since Bella had been released she'd worked from home and her friends had also come to visit her rather than asked her to come to them. But the best thing about this week's was that their house was finally ready for them to return and Edward and Bella wouldn't return to the manor. Something that pleased Bella immensely. It wasn't as if she didn't love the manor, but their own house was somehow special. Bella was sitting outside and looking through some manuscripts when Edward returned from his last day of work before they would fly to the south. "Hey, love," Edward whispered as he kissed her gently. "How was your day?" "Slow," Bella answered as she watched him loosening his tie and relaxing into the chair next to her. The Cullen's owned some really comfortable garden furniture which Bella had started using whenever the weather would allow it. Edward had already ordered some for their own house and Bella had thanked him for them very thoroughly. "And yours?" Edward grimaced. I can't wait for the trial to be other. Not a day goes by without some fucking news channel or something else asking for an interview. What about no is so hard to understand? People are just curious." Edward scoffed at that. "No, people are noisy and should fuck off. Our lawyers should add this whole fucking mess to James's list of crimes. I swear I'm turning prematurely gray." Quote. Bella laughed as she listened to her husband's complaints. "Don't worry, Edward, you would still look very handsome. Even with gray hair. Think of Richard Gere. I doubt anyone even remembers his natural hair color and he's a very handsome man. So, should I be worried that you think him to be attractive?" Maybe." Edward laughed and shook his head. "You're one silly woman. You wouldn't have me any other way." "That's certainly true. Oh, and by the way, I made sure that everything is taken care of for our trip and for their wedding gift." "Wonderful." At first Bella hadn't known what she should get her two friends, but a conversation between the three of them had inspired Bella. After some planning everything was arranged and now Bella and Edward, Jane and Felix and the staff of Phoenix would gift together. "And Mr. Albig called to tell me that our house is done. Everything is in perfect condition and tomorrow afternoon they'll be done with cleaning." Finally, Edward seemed to be as relieved as Bella was. "Yes, and I already started packing our things. Kate will take them with her when she returns to the house. I made sure that one of the security team will help her and stay there until we return. I didn't think that Kate would be comfortable being on her own, seeing as Garrett will be with us. You think of everything. Thanks, and now let's go inside. I'm hungry. Your baby wants food." With a carefree laugh Edward scooped her up and carried her into the small dining room where they normally ate. They spent their last night at the manor packing and making sure that everything was ready for their departure the next morning. Both Edward and Bella would have loved to celebrate the occasion with some wild sex, but sadly, Bella's ribs were still too tender for such strenuous activities. Another thing that should be counted against James in their opinion, not that everyone cared though. The next morning Garrett drove T.H.M. to a small airport where the private jet of the family was placed. Jane and Felix were already waiting for them when they arrived, and the two women immediately hugged and stared, gossiping while the three men shared a look and proceeded to carry their luggage into the jet. Sometimes these two act as if they're still teenagers, Felix muttered under his breath when he and Edward entered the jet. True, but don't say that or we won't be getting any for a very long time. And I really need sex, but I have to wait until Bella feels better. That sucks. Yup. Bella and Jane ignored their husband's for the majority of the flight, and more than once Jane bemoaned the fact that they didn't have their own personal jet. Because it would be oh so practical for romantic and sexy getaways. Edward read that they could use it whenever it wasn't needed, but only if Jane promised to never give Bella any strange ideas. Jane just smiled as innocently as she could, which wasn't much, and inclined her head. They arrived around noon at Charlotte, and Garrett drove them to the hotel where they would be staying. There was no way that they would be staying at the Webbers'. Jane would most likely shock them to death. After they'd checked in and freshened up, they hurried to Angela's home because her last mail had sounded a little hysterical. Shit, Jane exclaimed as they neared their destination. How many churches could one city need? This is ridiculous. Well, this is the Bible Belt. It is to be expected, Edward commented, but he too looked surprised. Jane, please, try to behave, Bella begged her friend as she saw Jane's grimace. The Webbers are very religious and conservative. We don't want to shock them and ruin Angela's and Ben's wedding. Felix tried to hide his amusement as Jane pouted. He knew his wife wouldn't be able to behave even if her life depended on it, but she was able to tone it down. Fine, I'll try to be nice and not to shock them with the knowledge that there is more to sex than the missionary position. For one moment everyone was silent before the men burst out laughing. Bella glared at her friend and elbowed her husband. What, Bella, you have to admit that was funny. Maybe, but Angela won't think so. Choosing her wedding dress was bad, but this will be even more so. But maybe, Jane added, it would do Angela good to laugh. And she should expect me to say something scandalous at one point. That was sadly true, and Bella feared that this whole wedding would end in a catastrophe. Garrett stopped the car a few minutes later, and for the first time Bella saw Angela's childhood home. The house had 2-storied and a beautiful veranda. The window frames and the front door were blue, and in the front yard stood an old but big willow. You could hear the B.U.S.Y. voices from the front yard, and Bella knew that Angela would be ready to tear out her hair. She hated crowds nearly as much as Bella did and loved to do things quietly. Bella knocked loudly so that someone would hear them, and about 10 seconds later the door was ripped open and a harassed-looking bride stood in front of them. Oh, thank good, you're finally here. Bella shared a quick look with Her group, and the men only stayed to greet Angela and wish her a good day before they ran back to the car. They would be staying with Ben. And if he was only half as stressed as Angela was, then he would need them desperately. Angela nearly dragged them to her room and only gave her friends a moment to greet her mother and grandmother. This is a nightmare, Angela cried as she locked the door behind them. Every distant cousin will be here by tomorrow, and most of them are already. My aunt and Catherine's mother called me to complain about the dresses for the bridesmaids. Apparently they're indecent. I just know that my grandmother has something to do with it. Angela, Jane screamed and handed her hip flask that she'd pulled out of her purse. Take a breath and take a deep swallow. Jane, Bella called out. It's not even 2 yet and you're handing out the hard stuff. Angela needs. Fuck. While Bella had spoken, Angela had grabbed the flask and most likely swallowed its whole content. Bella was staring at her friend as she burped before she handed the flask back. Thanks, I needed that. Okay, Jane said dubiously, even she looked a little worried now. Not that I'm not. All for you finally letting loose, but I doubt this weekend is the right time for it. Care to share why you're willing to get drunk? My grandmother gave me the talk this morning. Bella and Angela just blinked for a moment before Jane grabbed her phone and called Garrett. We're leaving immediately. Get dressed. Angela quickly threw on some decent clothes before the three friends left the Who. Say under the loud protests of the Webbers. Garrett arrived just 4 minutes later and Jane ordered him to take them to their hotel. Edward and Jane, the snobs, had chosen the Ritz for their stay. It wasn't that far away from the wedding venue or Angela home, but it had the necessary standard, at least for Jane. Bella hadn't cared too much about their hotel as they would only be staying for 2 days. The moment Garrett had stopped the car, Jane had jumped out of it and ordered Bella to bring Angela to their suite. Bella, knowing better than to question her oldest friend when she was on quest, just nodded and pulled Angela to the lift. Said woman stared at the modern decor as if she'd never been inside such a hotel before. And maybe that was true. Angela's family wasn't poor, but they didn't have the money to stay at the best hotels either. Bella had grown up with money, and whenever her family had been on vacation, they'd stayed at the best hotel available. Nothing else would have been good enough for them. And since she'd married Edward, it had continued that way. Once they were in their suite, Bella pushed Angela onto the couch and brought her a glass of water. They didn't really talk while they waited for Jane, who entered the room not even 10 minutes later. Okay, girls, everything is organized and our late lunch should be here in a few minutes, and after that we're going to the spa to get pampered. No back chatting. Quote. Angela looked shocked and a little overwhelmed, but also relieved that she wouldn't have to deal with the wedding for a few more hours. Thanks. P.F. Don't mention it. Now tell us why your family thought it to be prudent to give you the talk. Angela blushed a little but answered. Well, my family is very traditional and religious, and they believe that you should be a virgin on your wedding day. They don't know that I had had sex before and I never told them. Bella had expected something like this, but Jane looked shell-shocked. What? Are you serious? Angela nodded and Jane started cursing loudly and colorfully. Luckily, she was interrupted by a knock on the door and the arrival of their food. Jane had ordered some sandwiches and lots of sweet things. The three ate as much as they could, no one more than Bella, before they left the suite and went to their spa treatments. Apparently Jane had made sure that they knew that Angela would be marrying tomorrow, and they treated her like a goddess, and soon enough she was utterly relaxed. The alcohol might have helped a little bit, but massage and other treatments helped Angela to shut off her brain. It was nearly midnight when Bella and Jane dropped the now exited bride off. Sadly, the majority of her family was still up, and so Bella and Jane had to make sure that Angela could go to sleep without being harassed by anyone. Bella quickly dragged Angela to her room and waited there until her friend returned from the bathroom. Jane had opted to wait downstairs so that she could stop anyone who even thought of coming upstairs. The whole affair didn't take half an hour, and both women were content to know that Angela wouldn't consider running off now. Edward, would you please hurry up now? Gee, Arette is already waiting for us and I want to leave in 5 minutes. Bella was sitting in the living room of their suite, waiting for her husband, who took far too long getting ready. They had got up at the same time, but somehow she had been ready for about 20 minutes now while her husband was still in the bedroom. Bella wore the pale yellow dress that Angela had chosen for her bridesmaids. Bella just had to get her dress one size bigger because she'd already gained a little weight and bigger boobs. The front part of her hair was pulled back so that she wouldn't be bothered by it during dinner. Beside that, her locks fell freely down her back. Her nude pumps looked great and her small purse matched her dress. Bella had to say that she looked good, but if Edward wouldn't get his ass in gear she would start pulling her hair out. Edward, hold your horses, Bella. I'm ready. Bella turned to her approaching husband and was pleased that he was indeed ready. His dark gray suit made Ella think naughty things, and he even wore a pale yellow tie matching to her dress. Shouldn't the woman take an eternity to get ready? Why are you so early? Edward pouted, but Bella just smiled at him and pulled him out of their suite. I'm a bridesmaid and Jane and I need to be there so that Angela doesn't decide to run away or murder her family. These women are worse than my own family in some points. Edward winced at that. Ouch. Really? That bad? Bella gave him a look. Yes, Edward, that bad. Why do you think Jane and I kidnapped Angela yesterday? She needed to get away from them. I mean, fuck. They honestly think Ben and Angela never had sex before. That startled Edward so badly that he swallowed wrong and started coughing. Bella rubbed his back while he stared at her like she'd told him a bad joke. Yes, I'm serious and that's why we need to be extra early. And don't you dare say anything to either Ben or Angela. Edward just nodded and didn't mention it again, but Felix, seeing Edward's red and shocked face, guessed the cause of it and grimaced. Garrett drove them to a little inn where Ben and his groomsmen had stayed these last few days. Bella wanted to speak to him before they went to the church. Inside it looked as if the men had just woken up, but that didn't stop Ben from looking like he was about to vomit. Oh Bella. As soon as he saw her, he ran to Bella and hugged her like he was drowning and she his only help. Why did I ever agree to this madness? Her father and other male relatives talked to me about how I should make Angela's first tie special and an ARG. Okay. Bella had always thought that her family was crazy, but this was worse. Calm down, Ben, and take a deep breath. They don't know what they're talking about. You know Angela much better than them. You don't need anyone's help when it comes to making Angela happy. She looks at you as if you hung the moon. Ben was now staring at her with huge puppy eyes and Bella wanted to squeeze and pet him. Really, Ben, don't let this nonsense get to you. Ignore them. The moment you see Angela walking towards you, you'll forget anything else. Really? Yup, Felix said from behind them. Very family is crazy, but it's worth dealing with them. I imagined myself playing hockey with their heads, when everything got too much. It helped. True, Edward agreed. I wasn't in love with Bella when we got married, but more than once I thought of killing them. At the end I imagined them as chicken. Headless chicken. Bella and Jane just stared at them as the other married men in the room shared their stories about crazy families. At first Bella feared that they would stress Ben even more, but soon he was laughing. A few moments later, the four left the groom alone and drove to the church. Edward and Felix decided to take a little walk until it was time to sit down while Bella and Jane searched for the bride. They found her and way too many people in the bride room. It was chaotic. My God, Jane whispered as she stared at the scene in front of her. There's something wrong with this family. There just has to be. They make our families seem sane and that's just wrong. Maybe, but at least they truly care for Angela. Even if they overdo it a little. Jane snorted but didn't comment. They put their purses on a table and went to greet the bride. Angela looked relieved to see them, but was unable to hug them as she was getting her hair and makeup done. Good morning, you two. You look beautiful. Good morning to you, too, and thanks, but no one will look more beautiful than you today. Bella said and smiled when Angela flushed. She, much like Bella, didn't handle compliments well. Bella's right, Angela, and don't you dare to argue. A bride is always the most beautiful woman on a wedding. As soon as you leave this pandemonium behind and see Ben, you'll glow, but only if you're not hidden under a ton of makeup, Jane said and glared at the woman doing Angela's makeup. Hey, watch the blush. Angela doesn't want to look like a clown. Sometimes less is more. Way less. The young woman, one of Angela's cousins if Bella remembered correctly, nearly dropped the brush but did what Jane told her. Bella and Jane shared a smile as they watched Jane taking charge. What do you want to do with that eyeshadow? Lady, the hair is allowed to move, you know, there's no reason to use a bottle of hairspray. And don't you dare use that lipstick on Angela. Classic and subtle. She's not supposed like a professional. Honestly, the farther south you go, the worse the makeup becomes. Angela giggled and suddenly looked much calmer. While she was worried she would hurt her family's feelings, Jane didn't care about that. She just wanted Angela to look beautiful but still like herself. Bella had to admit that Jane was doing a great job delegating. Bella led Jane to her thing while Bella sat next to Angela and distracted her with silly stories. Angela's grandmother, the old shrew, entered the room a few minutes later and looked less than pleased and was now marching toward them, with a pinched look on her face. "Who do you think you are? Our family has always done the makeup and hair for the bride and no one ever complained. You'll make her look plain." Ouch. That hadn't been nice, and Bella saw out of the corner of her eye that Angela had flinched lightly. Bella was about to snap at her, but Jane beat her to it. "I'm Jane and a good friend of Angela, who wants to make sure that she'll feel comfortable and not be horrified when she later looks at her wedding photos. I don't care about your traditions, but if you ruin her day, you'll have me to deal with. And that's nothing you want to." Jane's face looked like it was made of stone and her tone was icy. She looked really dangerous, and even the old hag must have realized that it was better not to push her. With a glare of her own, she whirled around and left. After that, no one dared to cross Jane, and she made sure everything was to Angela's satisfaction. When it was time for her to find her husband and take her seat, she quickly hugged Angela and told her to enjoy the day. Angela waited until Jane was out of the door before she said anything. "Jane is really something else." Bella smiled at that. "Yep, and she is scary. Baby, you don't know half of it." "Oh yes." The ceremony was wonderful. Mr. Weber, who was the minister, made it special, and groom and bride looked elated to finally get married. Angela's dress was simple but beautiful. She wasn't a fan of princess dresses and had chosen a straple SS slim satin dress with a taupe belt and a small train. Her veil was long, and Bella knew that Angela wore rather flat shoes because she was little taller than Ben. The moment the groom saw his bride, he teared up, but he wore the biggest smile. Bella was sure that those two would have a happy marriage. After the ceremony, they took a few pictures before the party drove to the final location. The reception was held at an old estate. The main building had a wonderful ballroom, and in the garden was a huge tent. Everything was beautifully decorated, and you could see that the family had put much thought into it. Bella and Edward enjoyed themselves very much, as did the other couple. They waited until after the happy couple had cut the cake and thrown her Angela's bouquet before Bella and the other three approached them. Something about their expressions must have told Ben and Angela that they had planned something, because both looked a little afraid. "Okay, what have you done?" Ben asked. "Well," Bella began with a mischievous smile, "I know that you think you don't have the money for a proper honeymoon yet and you refuse to take some time off, but what kind of friends would we be if we'd let you do that? Bella, please tell me you didn't spend a fortune, or something like that," Angela begged, and by now most of the guests had noticed the conversation between the friends and were eavesdropping. "Oh, we hardly spent anything," Jane laughed. "That's true, because most of it belongs to us already." Bella enjoyed teasing her friends but decided against torturing them any longer. "Instead of spending your wedding night in a nice hotel in Charlotte, you'll be spending it in the next week on the Bahamas." "Oh my God," Angela screamed and grabbed Ben, who looked like he was in shock. "Are you crazy?" "Absolutely," Jane agreed with a careless smile while her husband and Edward laughed. "But that's irrelevant because you're going to get changed now, and then Garrett is going to drive you to the airport where Edward's jet is waiting. Felix and I have suite at a resort there, which is where you're going to stay." Before Ben or Angela could say a word, Bella continued. "Don't worry about work. This present isn't just from us but also from everyone at Phoenix. We'll take care of everything while you're enjoying your honeymoon." Both bride and groom stared at their friends for a few moments before they threw themselves at them and hugged and kissed them. "You're all lunatics, but we love you anyway," Ben cried when he finally let go of Bella. "Thank you. This is the best gift you could have given us." "We know," Jane said before she dragged the two of them into the house to get changed. The hour that followed was hectic. Angela and Ben changed clothes and made sure that their luggage, that had been packed by Angela's and Ben's cousins, had everything they would need. Once they were back outside, the whole party came together for a loud, emotional and sometimes tearful farewell. Angela and Ben promised to call once they had settled in and to take lots of pictures. Mr. Weber and Mrs. Cheney had to be forced to let their children leave, but eventually they did allow the happy couple to get into the car. And then they were gone. "Well, I think those two will have a nice honeymoon," Jane said as she sipped her drink. "Should I have mentioned that beach sex isn't nearly as romantic and hot as claimed? Sand in your pussy is really uncomfortable." Edward and Felix nearly chalked on their drinks, and Bella wanted the ground to swallow her because some of the guests were staring at her strangely. "What?" Jane said as if she couldn't understand why everyone was acting so strange, and maybe she really couldn't. "It's true. I know, baby," Felix murmured. "I can't you understand why Angela and Ben would accept the gift? It's outrageous." Bella rolled her eyes as she heard Grandmother Weber once again complaining. "But they are so happy about it," Mrs. Weber tried to counter. She didn't seem to have a problem that her daughter and new husband had gotten a gift that nearly cost as much as the wedding itself. It was a known fact that Felix and Edward were very wealthy. "That doesn't matter. It made the rest of us look bad. They should have thought about that. The vacation is a waste of money. It's indecent to spend that much on something so useless." Bella had enough of the old dragon and her spiteful words. She turned around and marched over to the harridan. The whispered words from Edward to not do something stupid were ignored. "Listen here, you old shrew." Grandmother Weber glared hatefully at Bella, but she didn't give her a chance to speak. The other guests had heard Bella's exclamation and were now listening attentively. "We gave Ben and Ella this gift because we thought they would enjoy it and because we knew they didn't have the money for such a honeymoon. I know Angela always wanted to go to a tropical island for her honeymoon and we have the means to make her wish come true. The monetary worth of this gift isn't important, and neither Angela nor Ben would judge a gift by its price tag. All we wanted was for them to have a good time, and that's all that matters. Your opinion is irrelevant. You aren't the center of the universe, and this isn't the early 20th century. My God, would it kill you to be nice for one evening?" By the end of her rant, Bella was out of breath and slightly nauseous. The old woman wore a disgustingly cloying perfume, and that combined with the smell of the meat was a bad combination. "You disrespectful brat," Grandmother Weber hissed. "How dare you treat me so disrespectfully? I know more about this world than you ever will. I'm a woman who deserves respect." And the old woman didn't get continue because Bella, experiencing her first ever bout of morning sickness, threw up all over Grandmother Weber's flower dress. "Ah!" Mrs. Weber quickly grabbed her screaming mother-in-law and dragged her into the house to get her cleaned up, while many of the guests were laughing or at least gossiping about the recent incident. Edward immediately raced to his wife's side and helped her clean her mouth before he looked at Angela's father. "I guess it's time for us to go," he said with a sheepish smile, and guided Bella, who kept apologizing, off the estate. Felix had already called a taxi and Toge. There they stood in front of the house while they waited. "Well," Jane said, "it was entertaining. And you were worried I wouldn't behave myself." The only thing that stopped Bella from blushing tomato red and wishing the last 2 hours had never happened was that she couldn't stop throwing up. And when she wasn't kneeling in front of the toilet, she was fighting to keep the rest of the contents of her stomach inside. She wasn't really successful, but she was trying. At first, right after Bella and the other three had left the wedding, they'd laughed at Bella's predicament, but after the third bout of vomiting they'd stopped and started asking if she wanted to see a doctor, which Bella didn't. She wanted to be left alone. But that was apparently too much to ask for. Okay. Jane and Felix did even went to their own suite, but Edward refused to leave Bella alone and stayed with her in the bathroom. It was kind of nice that he wanted to look after her, but Bella hated to be seen weak. "Bella, do you want to drink something?" Edward asked her after she was done emptying her stomach. Not yet. Let me see if I'm done first." "Okay," he whispered and cleaned her face with a wet cloth. They stayed on the bathroom floor for about 20 minutes before they both deemed it safe to leave it. Edward carried her to the bed and helped her slip under the covers. During her vomiting they managed to get her out of her dress and into her nightshirt, so she didn't need to change now. I'll get you something to drink now and maybe something to eat, Edward said. Bella just nodded her head and listened as he went to the small fridge. After that he called the room service and asked for some broth and bread. Edward came back with a glass of Coke but without carbon dioxide. It wasn't eat, but Bella knew she needed something with sugar if she didn't want to collapse. Thank you, Bella murmured after she'd emptied the glass and handed it back to Edward. No need to thank me. I'll get changed now. Rest a little bit but don't fall asleep just yet. I want you to eat something. That wasn't what Bella wanted to hear, but she knew her husband was right. Luckily it didn't take long or the room service brought her soup and bread. Bella managed to eat some of it and was pleasantly surprised that her stomach didn't rebel against it. Soon Edward was satisfied with her and let her finally drift off. Bella slept like a stone for about 12 hours and she was happy that her first action wasn't to race to the toilet to throw up. Okay. She didn't look all that hot, but Edward promised that her face had a healthier color than yesterday night. At first she was very careful during breakfast, but soon enough she couldn't stop herself and started wolfing down eggs, bacon, pancakes and lots of fruits. Edward only tried to stop her once, but the glare his wife threw him made him reconsider. After Bella had devoured every single bit of food she was happy and ready to fly home. Jane and Felix were surprised by Bella's sunny deposition but didn't question it, especially because Bella was more interested in talking about the mail she and Jane had gotten from the newlyweds. Angela and Ben were absolutely overwhelmed by their suite and had already sent them a few pictures. Bella was happy that her friends were enjoying their gift and knew that there would be a photo evening in the near future. The flight home was short and Bella barely said goodbye to her friends before she pushed Edward into the car and ordered Garrett to drive them home. The two men shared an amused glance. Edward had to fight hard to keep his smile at bay or Bella would have noticed that he found her behavior more than just cute. As it turned out, Bella wasn't the only one who was elated to be back at home. Kate came running out of the door the moment she heard the approaching car. Bella jumped out of the car and the two women embraced each other happily before Bella started firing off her questions. "Oh Kate, I'm so happy to be back home. Is everything as we wanted? Are there any lingering smells? Was the house really clean? I hope you didn't have to scrub the floors or anything like that. Oh, I hope they didn't trample on the flowers. Sometimes the craftsmen don't look where they're going." Kate, who was already wearing her favorite apron, didn't laugh at Bella's word vomit. No, she nodded and looked as if she knew exactly Bella what was talking about. Their men just shook their heads at them and went to grab their luggage while the women went inside. "Don't worry, Bella, everything is perfect. There are no unpleasant smells, besides the ones from the new paint, and the garden looks fine. They did a great job. I'm very pleased. But how are you? Garrett called me and told me about your first bout of morning sickness." Quote. Bella grimaced, which caused Kate to smile. "It was horrible. I hope I won't have it that bad again. I threw up on Angela's mother. Talk about embarrassing. Not that she didn't deserve it. The old bind. Well, let's hope for the best, but I went shopping and got everything you should need, should you continue to throw up. I got special teas, crackers and several other things." "Kate, you're a saint," Bella said and once again thanked her lucky stars for bringing Kate into her life. Bella took off her jacket and shoes before she went into every room in which the craftsman had worked in. Kate had been right, Bella decided. Everything looked good and you wouldn't guess that there had been a fire in the house. You could still smell the new paints and some other stuff, but nothing that was too bad and couldn't be dealt with a thorough airing. The house still felt like home and Bella was happy to be back. Most women enjoyed being pregnant and glowed. Bella wasn't one of them. At least she wasn't one this early in her pregnancy. No, she hated it. Oh, it wasn't as if she always felt nauseous or something, but she did empty her stomach at least once a day, and that put a serious damper on her mood. And on everyone else. One of Phoenix business partners had tried to make her agree to new conditions that weren't in Phoenix favor and Bella had Hot that idea down before that fool of a man could even finish his argument. No one knew of Bella's pregnancy yet, well beside family, friends and Bella's employees, otherwise they wouldn't have been surprised by Bella's mood. They left the office without having accomplished anything other than pissing off Bella. The employees knew very well that Bella was a right bitch during her period and fear that she would be even worse during her pregnancy. And so far Bella had proven them right. Edward was also cautious of his wife's mood and called Bella's secretary once a day to check it. A very move on his part, as he'd learned the hard way how vicious Bella's hormones could be, and therefore he was very careful when he entered his house 1 week after Ben and Angela's wedding. The sounds coming from the kitchen squashed his hope that Bella might have calmed down by now. He silently walked to the kitchen door and watched his wife for a moment. It was obvious that Bella was still mighty pale, even because Edward doubted that the Peppers had done anything to deserve that kind of harsh treatment. "Hey, Bella," Edward saw Ed as he entered the kitchen and kissed Bella's temple. "How was your day?" Bella glared rather fiercely at that. "I had a meeting with our delivery company. They tried to squeeze more money out of me. 5%. That was just ridiculous. Just because we're a young and rather small publishing house doesn't mean that we're desperate or stupid. They wanted 5% more, Edward. That's way more than the others pay. And then they have the audacity to be offended when I refuse to agree. I nearly threw them out of my office. Whoever it had been that had been at the meeting today had been a fool." Bella and her partners knew what they were doing, and it was rather daring, if not a little stupid, to expect that Bella would agree to pay that much more for delivering of their books. "I guess they didn't know how tough a businesswoman you are. Normally Angela handles these kind of meetings and they know she wouldn't have agreed. I guess they just wanted to see how far they could push you." "That may be," Bella snapped as she marched to the fridge to grab the cheese. "I can't fault them for trying to make a better deal, but they weren't willing to negotiate. They wanted the 5% and nothing less. If they don't stop acting so stupid, then we'll have to search for a new company to deliver our books." Edward had to bit his lips to stop himself from smiling. It wasn't surprising for Edward that Bella would be willing to search for a new business partner. You couldn't enter a meeting and not be willing to negotiate. It was rare that one got exactly what one wanted. Edward should know. Negotiating conditions and prices was normal, and Edward could understand why Bella was unwilling to deal with someone who wasn't willing to play by the rules. You must do what is best for Phoenix. In a few days Angela and Ben are going to be back, and then you can discuss it with them. Don't let this anger you. Some of the tenseness left Bella's body. I know you're right. It just pissed me off that they weren't even willing to negotiate. But now it's the weekend. And we're going to watch a movie and eat pizza. Sounds good to me. I'm going to change now. They spent the night and the first weekend back in their renovated house doing mostly nothing. During the day they read, mostly outside or in the conservatory, and every evening they would cook and then watch movies. And Sunday night they had sex for the first time since James had attacked her. Edward was very careful. He didn't want to hurt Bella, and it was strange for him to put his dick inside his wife when he knew she was having his baby. Bella found it cute, and after a few encouraging words Edward forgot about the baby and concentrated on pleasuring his wife. If Bella or Edward had hoped that the next week would be any better, they were crossly disappointed. Not only continued Bella to throw up at least once a day, but Jasper's visit early Tuesday morning brought James back into their lives. Both were more than surprised to see Jasper at their home before 8, but his face told them that it was important. Bella quickly made Jasper a cup of coffee and brought him a bagel before the three sat down. "Thanks, Bella," Jasper said with a smile. He was already dressed for work and wore a dark brown suit with a light blue shirt. Bella could understand why so many women, Alice included, wanted him for themselves. Jasper was one sexy man. "Well, I'm here because James's lawyer contacted us. It seems that James is going to plead guilty." "What?" Edward and Jasper nearly jumped off their chairs when Bella screamed. But that was understandable. No one had expected that James wouldn't fight tooth and nail to avoid jail. Yes, I know. Surprising, isn't it? Everyone was very shocked, but James's lawyer convinced him that there was no way that he would get off. That is certainly true, but if he pleads guilty it'll do him some good. But there's still no way that he'll ever be a free man again. It just means that his time in prison could be a little easier. So I take it that the trial will be over quickly? Edward asked while he watched his oldest friend. Yes, and that means less press coverage, and hopefully the media will find something else to entertain them. So, it'll be over soon? Bella asked and grabbed Edward's hand, who gently squeezed it. Yes, Bella. In a few weeks this whole mess will be over. Thank God. Bella breathed, and then a large smile crossed her face. That means we're going to have more time taking care of the nursery. Edward suppressed a tortured groan. His wife hated shopping, and even though she wasn't that far along, she'd already ordered half a dozen catalogs for everything baby-related. Wonderful, dear. Jasper snickered as he saw his friend's expression. Don't worry, Edward, Alice and Esme can help Bella. But before Edward had a chance to feel relief over his friend's words, Bella had already destroyed it. No, Alice. She can help Rose, which she already does, but I want to furnish the nursery for my baby with Edward and no one else. Bella threw her husband an apologizing look but carried on. I know that both Esme and Alice and maybe even Rose would love to help, but they have furnished this house and planned our wedding. I know, she said when she saw that Edward wanted to argue. It was our decision to let them do that because A, we didn't have the time for it, and B, they knew what they were doing and we didn't care too much. At least where the wedding was concerned. But this is different. We are different, and I want us to do this on our own. Edward stared at Bella and saw that this was really important to her, and he had to admit that she was right. Okay, Bella, he agreed and kissed her. We are going to do everything on our own. Although Edward was dreading more of it, the brilliant smile on his beautiful wife's face was worth it. Okay, you two lovebirds, Jasper said as he stood up. As lovely as it is here, I have to go to work if I don't plan to be late. Bella looked confused for a moment, and CKLY looked at the clock that was hanging over the door before paled. Holy shit, why didn't anyone tell me it was already so late? I'm going to be late and I'm not even dressed yet. With these words, Bella, who was still in her very comfortable and very old sleep shirt, jumped up and raced out of the room. Edward, already dressed in a gray three-piece, just shrugged as Jasper stared after Bella. Don't worry. Bella is sometimes a little chaotic in the mornings. You get used to it. If you say so, Jasper said doubtfully while he heard Bella cursing from the bedroom. 2 weeks later, Bella was still throwing up and still very moody. In fact, she'd gotten worse, and more than once had Angela and Ben needed to interfere while Bella was screaming at some poor person. Everyone was therefore thankful when Rose decided to visit Bella at work and promised to speak to her sister-in-law. They hoped that Bella would be calmer when the heavily pregnant Rose talked to her instead of someone else, who in Bella's opinion didn't know what they were talking about. Hey, Mama-to-be. Bella looked up from her work when she heard Rose greeting and smiled when she saw that Rose was carrying a box pastries. Hello, Rose. It's good to see you. Sit down and give me one of those. Rose laughed and quickly handed her the box. A relieved sigh escaped her when she finally sat down. God, I can't wait for this to be over. I bet. Bella laughed and then moaned when the bit into a perfect white chocolate cupcake. But you don't have that much left. True, but I feel like I swallowed a huge balloon. My skin itches and I haven't seen my feet in weeks. I'm so not looking forward to that. I really don't understand how women can say that this is most wonderful time. I feel completely out of control. Bella complained and quickly snatched another cupcake. A strawberry one. So I've heard. Bella, you're scaring your employees. This is not only a friendly visit but also an intervention. What? Bella yelled. Those traitors called you because they don't have the balls to talk to me. Rose raised a brow and pointed her donut at her. No, because you're being unreasonable, and even though I can understand you, You need to get a grip. Edward and Angela told me that your morning sickness is pretty bad and you're worse than on your worst period. Your bad mood is influencing the climate here. For one moment Bella looked like she wanted to argue, but then her expression crumpled and suddenly she was fighting back tears. I know, I'm acting like a monster, but I can't do anything against it. Each time something stresses me, I overreact. All this throwing up is making me gaga and I'm so horny. Rosalie sprayed Bella with the smoothie she'd been drinking when she burst out laughing. Bella jumped back to avoid being hit, but it was too late. Ew. Rose. That's disgusting. Bella whined and quickly grabbed a wet wipe to clean her blouse. Sorry. Rose chalked out as she tried to get her laughter under control. But that was just too funny. Normally you never talk about sex. Well, at least not when I'm around. I know, Bella muttered as she sat back down and racked her hands through her hair. But it's true that I've never been this horny. I fear poor Edward's dick is about to drop off. Rose, shoulders were shaking again, but this time she controlled herself. Oh, believe me, your husband won't complain for quite some time. Men are generally more horny than women. And just so you know, that's completely normal. Didn't your doctor tell you that? Well, yes, she did. But it's different hearing something and experiencing it. True, Rose admitted. I was surprised when it happened to me. Emmett was happy though. But back to our problem. You're driving everyone spare. I know your work is important to you, and because of all the problems these last few months you must be unwilling to take some time off. Rose, I'm one of 3 partners. I have to pull my weight. Anne, Gella and Ben already helped me often enough and they just got married. Bella didn't want to think about taking some time off. What kind of message sent it to her employees and business partners if she constantly took to the easy way? It was unprofessional. I know, Bella, Rose said. But no one would fault you if you took things a little easier. The last year was very stressful for you and so many things happened. You need to take a break. You're stressing yourself too much and that's the last thing you should be doing right now. Angela and Ben told me that they and everyone else here would support you should you decide to. Well, Bella glared as she heard that, but she couldn't argue with Rose. She was right. The last year had been hectic and very overwhelming. But what would I do all day long? You could work from home and only come here once a week or so. I know that your own computer has the necessary software. Rose hoped Bella would be reasonable and not be too stubborn. She stared at her sister-in-law and watched as Bella thought it through. It was obvious that this wasn't what Bella wanted, but it was the best solution for everyone concerned. Rose grimaced as the pain in her back flared up. Something wrong, Rose? Rose shook her head. Nah, it's just my back. It's bothering me, but that's nothing new. My doctor says that everything is fine. Bella looked at her doubtfully as Rose continued to rub her back. If you say so. Yes, and now back to you. What do you think? Bella nibbled on her lip and twisted her hands nervously. Rose waited patiently for her to speak as she knew Bella needed to make this decision on her own. I know that my mood swings are keeping people on edge, and I know that my throwing up is exhausting me. Edward already tried to talk to me about work, but I blocked. Phoenix is my baby and I don't want to neglect my duties, but I have to see reason. I'm not doing much good here and it's most likely better for me to work from home. That sucks. It does, Bella. But no one thinks you're neglecting your work. Your team is good, at least that's what you always told us. Trust them. Rose smiled when she saw Bella nodding. Well, I guess I have to speak to Ben and Angela. Don't worry, Bella, everything will turn out fine. Rose grimaced in pain as she felt her stomach harden. Bella was around the desk and beside her before Rose had time to blink. Rose, are you sure that everything is fine? This doesn't look good to me. Peef. My doctor told me that I would get these Braxton Hicks contractions. This is nothing more than a false alarm, Rose tried to assure Bella. But the fact that she was still in pain and that was obvious, did nothing to calm Bella. When was your last appointment? Did the doctor say anything? Rose. shook her head and breathed through another wave of pain. 3 days ago and everything looked like it should. My due date isn't for another 2 weeks and my cervix was still close. Bella still wasn't sure that Rose wasn't experiencing real contractions but was willing to wait for a little while. Okay, but maybe it would be better if you lay down until this is over. Sounds good, Rose agreed. She had to admit that the intensity of the pain was scaring her a little and she was glad that she wasn't alone. Bella offered her her arm and helped her stand up, which was more difficult for Rose than it should be. They slowly made their way to the short couch that was in the corner next to the huge window. Just as Rose was about to sit down she felt something warm and, well, wet running down her legs. Rose blushed fiercely. I fear I just peed myself. Bella looked at her like she doubted Rose's sanity. You did what? Peed myself. Bella took one calming breath before she forced Rose to look into her eyes. Rosalie, I seriously doubt that you've lost control over your bladder. It's much more likely that your water broke. Rose wanted to deny Bella's conclusion with everything she had, but when another gust of water ran down her legs not even she could cling to her denial. Oh my God, she whispered and started panicking. It's not supposed to happen yet. It's too early. Bella quickly grabbed her and Rose's purses before she turned back to her sister-in-law. No, Rose, it's not too early. It's completely normal for a baby to be born 2 weeks before its due date. Now come on, let's get you to the hospital. Dazed and a little panicked, Rose nodded and let Bella do whatever she wanted. Bella immediately called her bodyguard, driver, and not even 2 minutes later Bubba helped Rosalie into the car. By now everyone had noticed that something was going on and many were standing in the entrance area or near the car and wished Rosalie good luck and a fast and painless birth. I'll call you later. But Rose convinced me that your idea was the best, Bella called back to Ben and Angela shortly before Bubba closed the door. Said friends looked a little sheepish but also PPY that Bella would take things easier from now on. Bubba drove like a maniac and only the knowledge that he was a good driver stopped Bella from worrying for her life. Rose was holding her hand and trying to do the breathing exercises she'd learned, but it wasn't really working. Bella called Emmett and it was bad luck that he didn't answer. Bella left him a message before she called Jessica and asked her to find out where Emmett was and to inform Edward. Jessica agreed immediately and wished Rose luck. Bella had planned to call someone else from the family but due to Bubba's neck-breaking speed they were already at the hospital. The bodyguard jumped out of the car and ran inside before he returned with a nurse and a wheelchair. Well, you bodyguard acts fast, Rose huffed when her door was opened. You have to admit that it's better than panic, Bella added as she left the car. The nurse asked them the normal questions about how far along Rose was, when she started noticing contractions and who her doctor was. Rose answered every single question while the nurse pushed her to the maternity ward and into a room. A very nice room. Rose had decided where she would want to give birth weeks ago and the staff was aware who she was and what she wanted. It made things easier and Bella planned to do the same. Okay, Mrs. Cullen, I'm going to leave you for a few moments to let you get changed. I will return in a few minutes with Dr. Schwartz. Okay, the nice nurse asked. Rose just nodded. Someone softly cleared their throat and Bella looked to the door to see Bubba standing there, holding a small bag. Mrs. Cullen had this with her back at the office and I thought it could be important. Oh thank you, Rose cried out as she saw it. I thought we'd forgotten it. That's my hospital bag, everything I need is in there. I thought I would have to wear a hospital gown. Bubba quickly handed the bag to Bella and then left the room. Bella helped Rose out of her clothes and into a very big t-shirt. It had to belong to Emmett to still fit over Rose's stomach. Rose had just lied down when the door opened and the nurse and doctor entered the room. Ah, Mrs. Cullen, I didn't expect you for another week. This just proves that babies have their own plans. Now, let us see how far along you are. Dr. Schwartz was a very friendly man in his 40s who was very pale and very blonde. Bella stayed next to Rose and held her hand while the doctor examined her and checked the baby's heart rate. Apparently the birth was moving faster than normal for a primapara. And if Emmett wouldn't hurry up and get his ass there very soon, he would miss the birth of his first child. The nurse told them that some of the family had arrived and were waiting for news. Rose refused to let anyone else than Ed enter the room and begged the nurse to tell her family that she was thankful for their support but wanted only Bella in her room until her husband arrived. That surprised Bella, but Rose just glared at her. "Bella, you are the only one from this crazy family who won't start squealing or panicking upon seeing my baby. I love Esme, but right now I need calmness. And you need to be prepared." Bella was touched but also surprised that Rose had it still in her to tease Bella. In return, Bella promised to make many unflattering pictures of her. Because Rose was dilating so quickly, the doctor had to do the EPI early. Rose cursed Emmett and every god she could think of until the medication took effect and she managed to relax. Sadly, Emmett still hadn't arrived, and Bella had been informed that he had been to some meeting where they wanted to look at a building ground outside the city. And on the way back there had been an accident on the highway and now they were stuck. Bella didn't tell Rose that because she didn't fancy her going ape shit on her. "Thank you very much." 2 hours after they'd arrived at the hospital, the doctor told them what they really didn't want to hear, even if Rose was in very much pain. "Rosalie, we can't wait for your husband. You're fully dilated and if you don't push, it'll harm the baby. Do you understand me?" Bella grabbed Rose's hand tightly as a single tear ran down her red and sweaty cheek. "Yes, I understand. I'm going to kick Emmett's ass when he finally gets here. No sex for at least a year and nappy duties." Bella chalked back a laugh as she heard Rose threats. "Of course, Rose. But now you have a baby, push out of your body." "I don't want to." Rose started to whine but was cut short when the next contraction hit her and Dr. Schwartz ordered to push. Rose squeezed Bella's hand so tightly that Bella feared her bones would be grounded to dust. Once the contraction was over, Rose slumped back. "Why did I ever want to have a child, and why didn't I demand a C-section?" Bella didn't know she was supposed to say to that and feared that Rose would bite her head off should she dare to say something like "it is worth it." And so Bella just stayed silent and pressed a gently kiss on top of her hair. During the next contractions, Bella learned that Rose could curse in 3 different languages and very colorfully. The nurse in the room had more th. And once blushed at something Rose had growled, and the doctor sometimes looked a little fearful. Bella just smiled at them, but even though she knew how Rose was, she was also very surprised by what came out of Rose's mouth. It also made her wary of the time when it would be her time to push a little human being out of her vagina. Sooner than Bella thought it should be possible. "Drive," Schwartz announced. That with the next contraction the head would be out. That spurred Rose on to push even harder and she screamed rather loudly, but after 10 seconds the head was there. Bella didn't dare to look, even though she was very curious, but her aversion of blood prevented her from actually doing it. After that, Rose took one last pause before she pushed the rest of the baby out of her. Fuck, motherfucking fuck. More, Rosalie. Just a little bit more and then you're going to be able to hold your baby. Come on. Bella was sure she would have hearing difficulties after today in AC. Rushed hand, but all this was secondary when the first cry of the newest member of the Cullen family was heard. Rose slumped back and started crying, but there was a huge smile on her face that only meant to grow with the doctor's next announcement. "It's a boy." "Oh, Rose," Bella screamed as she stared at the little slimy baby which Dr. Schwartz handed the happy mother. "Congratulations." Rosalie didn't react. She was too busy studying her son. The baby was clearly Emmett's son. It was huge and had dark hair that seemed to curl. Remembering that this moment should be preserved, Bella quickly grabbed her purse and pulled her phone out of it and took many pictures. Suddenly a commotion could be heard from the hallway and then the door was pushed open and a very panicked and disheveled Emmett stormed inside. "Rose." Everyone stared at him as he took in the scene in front of him. His eyes immediately went to his wife, who was still holding their newborn son against her chest. Shock and wonder appeared on Emmett's face before his eyes traveled down her body, in between her still open legs. His eyes nearly bugged out of its sockets as he saw the bloody mess between his wife's legs, and before anyone could do anything his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Due to Emmett's size, it felt and sounded like a big tree had come down, and for a second everyone just stared at him. Are you fucking kidding me? First he misses his son's birth and then he faints at the sight of my pussy. Rose sounded so incredulous and pissed that Bella started laughing. But that didn't stop her from taking more pictures. The helpful nurse tried to rouse him, but Rose stopped her. Don't waste your breath. Just let him lie there. I so hope that Edward is made out of harder stuff, or you'll have to do without him. I hope so too, Bella agreed, still laughing, and sent Edward the picture of his unconscious brother with a small message. Parenthood knocked him down. Baby's there. Theodore Cullen was the N.E.U. sweetheart of the Cullen family and everyone who'd seen him. He was a lovely baby, and neither Rose nor Emmett had any problems with him. Well, there was one thing that Rosalie didn't like, and that was her son's enormous hunger. He drank until there wasn't one drop of milk left in his mother's breasts, and because of that Rose's nipples were very tender and sore. Theodore was now 3 weeks old, and Rosalie had already tried to give him the bottle just to give her poor nipples some rest, but Teddy didn't like it but also didn't refuse it, for which Rose was eternally grateful. In these 3 weeks since the birth of the youngest Cullen, Emmett had to endure the ridicule of most of the family. Surprisingly, Edward was keeping himself back, mostly because Emmett had told him that Edward still had to go through the birth of his own child, and there was no telling how he would manage. Bella was the only one who knew about Emmett's words and couldn't fault her husband for being careful. Emmett was a firm believer in payback. Another thing that had happened was James's trial, and because he had pleaded guilty, it was over before it had really began. Some reporters and other noisy people were disappointed that the trial didn't give them as many headlines and juicy details as hoped, but the family was thankful for it, and they could finally put this nightmare behind them. Oh, and Bella kept her word and stopped working for the most part. She still read the manuscripts, talked with the authors under her care, and made sure that the manuscripts got ready for print, but now that she didn't have to deal with the stress at work anymore, she was much more relaxed. And everyone around her was very happy about it. But the fact that Bella wasn't working as much anymore also meant that she had more time to prepare everything for the arrival of the baby. Yes, it was still early, but she was now 5 months along and she had a small bump. Not enough to be too obvious, or for the media to write about. But to those who knew of the pregnancy, it was easy to spot the growing baby bump. Edward, Bella called to her husband one Tuesday evening while they were lounging in the living room. What do you think about going shopping for some things for the nursery? Edward thought long over his answer. For one, he didn't want to go shopping. He was a man, and men as a general rule hated shopping, but he knew that they needed to start at some point. I guess we could go this weekend, but don't you want to wait until you know the gender of the little one? Bella glared at him lightly. She knew what Edward wanted to achieve with this question. He wanted to postpone the shopping trip, but sadly for him, Bella was smarter. Have you forgotten that I have an appointment this Thursday? Edward flinched a little, which made Bella smile evilly. Dr. Summer told me that she would be able to tell us the sex of the baby at this appointment, and even if our little one turns out to be unwilling to tell us if it is a boy or a girl, we'll still need to buy lots of stuff. Rose and Emmett didn't know what they were having, and the nursery was ready when Rose went into labor. The pout on Edward's face looked quite hilarious, and he knew it, but he really didn't want to go shopping. He feared that someone would see them and report it to the media, and then they would be in the center of their attention again. But even Edward knew that they couldn't buy everything online. Bella would never agree to it. Okay, love. Friday should be a pretty easy day and we can go shopping around 3. Sounds good. Bella Avenue her answer nonverbally when she jumped onto Edward's lap and kissed him until his pants were too tight to be comfortable. Oh well, maybe it wouldn't be too bad. Edward hated the practice of Bella's OB-GYN. Well, there was nothing really wrong with it. Everyone was very nice and professional and the rooms were tastefully decorated, but Edward still felt uncomfortable. It might have something to do with the fact that normally men didn't belong there until they were there with a woman. The waiting room wasn't too crowded, but Edward could see some women in various stages of pregnancy and only 3 had a man with them. And the knowledge of what would be happening here made him twitch. Bella, who was enjoying his discomfort, decided to calm him a little bit. Edward, there's no reason for you to be so uncomfortable. Today I won't have to let drive. Summer between my legs. Edward cringed noticeably. He couldn't understand how women could let someone they weren't involved with put their hands into their vaginas, or worse. Some of these horrible-looking instruments. Please, Bella, I fear I'm still traumatized from the last time. I can't believe that women willingly let someone do this to them. Yes, I guess men have it easier, Bella smirked. Out of the corner of her eye she saw that a few women were trying to suppress their amusement. Yes, Edward agreed immediately. And I'm incredibly thankful that I'm a man and now I'm seeing women in a very different light. You are just stronger than men. We wouldn't be able to deal with something so invasive. Bella laughed at that, but her entertainment was cut short when her name was called and she and Edward followed the nurse into an examination room where blood was drawn, the heart rate checked and Bella had to be weighed, which she hated. After that was done they were brought to a new room where Dr. Summer would soon join them and then do the ultrasound. So, Edward, what do you hope for? A boy or a girl? Bella asked after the nurse had left them. Edward was sitting on a stool next to the couch on which Bella was. His legs were moving restlessly and Bella hoped to calm him because he was making her edgy. I don't know. A boy would be great. Especially because I wouldn't have to fear about horny boys trying to get into his pants. And it would be fun to teach him sports, but a girl would also be great. A little princess. Bella smiled as she listened to him. She knew Edward didn't really care about which gender their baby would have, but somehow she thought that he would love to spoil a little girl. Yes, I can understand that. Hopefully, Dr. Summer will be able to tell us. What will I be able to tell you? Asked the voice of the doctor from the door. As usually the doctor wore a happy smile. If our baby is a girl or a boy? Bella answered as she shook hands with her. Oh yes, I might, but only if your little one cooperates. So I hear that congratulations are in order. Your aunt and uncle now. Yes, Theodore is just adorable. And Rose is already feeling really well. It was audible that Bella was a little peeved about that. It was disgusting how perfect Rose looked again. That's good to hear, and how are you? Any more morning sickness? Bella grimaced at the question and Edward did his best to keep his face neutral. His wife didn't enjoy being pregnant. Not at all. Well, I still feel nauseous from time to time, but no. I haven't thrown up since I entered my 4th month. But that doesn't mean that I'm fine now. My feet hurt and my ankles are often swollen. Sometimes I can't even make out my ankle. My nipples are tender and boobs look like I've gotten implants. And I'm as emotionally stable as an unsecured bomb. I'm just waiting to go off. I had to stop working because my moods were making everyone crazy. By now Bella was fighting tears and Edward grabbed her hand to show her his support. Dr. Summer had silently listened to Bella's rant and looked at her sympathetically. Okay. First let me tell you that everything looks good so far and nothing you've told me is out of the norm. Not every woman feels beautiful and great during her pregnancy. That's an urban myth. And I'm very happy that you've decided to quit working. The last year was very trying and you never took time to deal with everything that had happened to you. You were under too much stress, and if you hadn't realized that, then I would have told you. That wasn't what Bella wanted to hear, but there was nothing she could do but nod. Edward gave her hand a gentle pat and smiled at her. He knew it wasn't easy for Bella to hear this, but he was thankful that Dr. Summer agreed with them, as it would make it easier to keep Bella calm when she would get restless. But now let us see how your baby is doing, okay? Dr. Summer said and asked Bella to pull her shirt up and push her pants down. Bella wasn't huge a fan of ultrasounds. The gel was always cold and icky, and if she didn't want to see her baby she would have refused. Dr. Summer needed a few moments to get the right ankle to measure the baby, a little on the small side, but completely normal. The heartbeat, a sound that both Edward and Bella loved greatly, was also perfect. The expecting parents shared an excited smile when the doctor finally looked for the gender. Someone is a little shy here. Oh, but now it's moving. Come on, little one, move you legs for me. Yes, there it is. Dr. Summer quickly pushed a few buttons and froze the picture on the screen. Well, do you want to know if you should buy things in blue or in pink? Of course, Edward exclaimed and leaned forward so that he would have a better look at the screen. Bella was also very excited but stayed where she was. I'm about 95% sure that your little baby is a girl. The good doctor announced and watched in obvious pleasure as Edward hugged his wife and kissed her passionately. Both were wearing happy smiles and even a few tears could be seen. Especially on Edward's face. Oh my God, a little girl. We're going to have a princess. That's unbelievable. It is, Bella agreed. Her eyes were still trained on the screen. Well, you seem to be very happy about it, Dr. Summer said while she printed the ultrasound pictures and handed them to Edward. Yes, we are. I think Edward hoped for a little girl even if he didn't say it. Hey, I would have been just as happy if it had been a boy, Edward complained, but there was no denying that there was some truth in Bella's words. Oh, I know. Half an hour later they had left the practice and were on their way home. Both had agreed that no one would know about the gender of the baby until after the birth. They wanted to keep this knowledge to themselves and there was no chance that the family would find out because everything related to the baby would be kept in the nursery, which was locked unless Edward or Bella were inside. One day later Bella fetched Edward from work and drove them to an insanely huge store for nursery furniture and everything baby related. Edward hoped that they wouldn't spend hours in that store, but he knew his wife better than that. What pleased Edward was that the parking lot wasn't too full. But the size of the store scared him. We're here, Bella exclaimed laughing and nearly jumped out of the car. Come on, Edward, we've got much to do. With a tortured sigh Edward followed his wife. Bella's first destination was the furniture department. She hoped to find some inspiration from the showrooms. Have you thought about what kind of color we could use for the walls? Bella asked as they walked through a wonderful white nursery. Don't most people use pink? Bella's glare told him that that had been the wrong answer. Just because our baby is IRL doesn't mean that her room needs to be pink. Think outside the boxes, Edward. Do you like pink? Edward grimaced and shook his head. Pink wasn't his favorite color. Okay. It could look nice, but most of the time he found it too gaudy. Like the one in front of them. Yes, the walls were pink and nearly everything else in it. Oh my God, Bella said and stared at the display in horror. How can people like this? There's so much pink and laces and that's the stuff nightmares are made of. And eye cancer. Quick, let's move, or someone might think we like this monstrosity. Bella grabbed Edward's hand and pulled him after her until they stood in front of a really nice boys' nursery. Now that's nice, but sadly not what we're looking for. They looked at every display but Bella didn't find a color scheme that she liked. Oh, she liked some of the boys' rooms well enough, but their baby was a girl. The nurseries for girls though were often too girly for Bella. Her daughter didn't need a princess room and she didn't think that white was a good color for a room where a baby should live in. Don't worry, Bella, Edward soothed her as he gently guided her to the bedding section. We've still got time and at least you won't have to deal with choosing furniture. Bella smiled as she heard that. It was true that Edward refused to buy the furniture for the nursery. The Cullen family the wonderful furnitures, and it was a matter of pride for Edward that his child would sleep in a Cullen-made crib. He'd already planned to take Bella to the attic of the manor where some really beautiful pieces were stored. Oh Edward, look, Bella's excited voice pulled him out of his thoughts. He turned to Bella and saw her showing him a pale yellow blanket. It's nice, Edward said, but Bella shook her head exasperated. Yes, it is. But that's not what I mean. The color, Edward, we could paint the nursery pale yellow. Edward thought about it for a moment. We could, and it would be much better than some stereotypical pink or purple. I like the idea. Bella's face was alight with happiness. I know, and we could add some turquoise or pale green. It would look fresh and cheerful without being too much. Oh, Edward, that's it. Edward smiled at his wife's enthusiasm but had to agree with her. The colors were great and they could use many different woods for the furnitures. Yes, it sounded perfect. After that was determined, the shopping trip became easier. Bella and Edward chose different bedclothes and blankets before they moved to the car seats. Here Edward felt much more comfortable. He'd already informed himself and knew which one he wanted. Bella was only allowed to choose the color but didn't argue. Next they chose the pram, but that was much more difficult. Both Edward and Bella had browsed the web and talked to Emmett and Rose, but they still didn't know what they wanted. Bella rejected most almost instantly because they looked too futuristic and ugly. She couldn't understand why so many prams were brown, gray or black. It was just horrible. While Edward didn't care too much about the color, he also had trouble to find one he liked. In the end they were both frustrated and left the store without getting everything they'd wanted to buy. On the way home they got lots of unhealthy food, ice cream included, and eat it while watching White House Down. The next day, after Bella had called Jane and complained to her about their unsatisfying shopping trip, Edward drove her to the manor and showed her the hidden treasures of the attic. Bella of course knew of the attic and had looked into it shortly, but she was still surprised by the size of it. Damn, some stores had less furnitures than the attic of the Cullens. Luckily the staff always made sure that the attic was well sorted so that you would be able to find what you were looking for. A young man showed them where the nursery furniture were and then left them alone. He handed Edward his phone number and promised to return should they need help. Sometimes Bella was still surprised at the life the Cullens were living. Ordinary people stored their old furnitures themselves, or at least knew where what was, but the Cullens needed the help of the staff. One could only shook their head in wonder. Okay, Bella, here are the cribs. There are 8 here. If you find something you like but want it in a different color, just say it. We can change it quite easily. Why does your family keep all this? Bella asked as she looked at an ornate crib. Well, for one, all these furniture are of high quality and can be used for many decades. Our pieces are much better made than most that you can buy at a store. We use good wood and not some cheap substitute. The other reason is the history behind them. Often fathers or other male relatives designed and built the cribs and other furniture for the nursery themselves. It's kind of a tradition. Emmett, too, got the crib for Theodore here and just restored it. That's a wonderful tradition. Bella whispered and let her hand ran over the aged wood of a crib that must have belonged to one of Edward's female ancestors. But why did you let me drag you to the store if you have this tradition? Now Edward looked a little sheepish. Well, I wanted to let you look at some options first, and just because I didn't tell you anything about this tradition, does it mean that I haven't told you that the furniture would be coming from our own workshops? And I've been working on something for our little princess. Startled, Bella whirled around and stared at him. Really? And what have you been working on? Nope. Edward said, laughing, and shook his head. I'm not telling you, sorry. You'll have to wait. Bella narrowed her eyes and tried to force him with her eyes to do what she wanted, but Edward wouldn't budge and just kept smiling. Defeated, Bella huffed and turned back to the different cribs. She looked at 2 more before she found a wonderful sleigh crib. Massive but still with beautiful carvings. The crib was dark brown, but Bella couldn't be sure if that was the wood's natural color or the coating. This crib is nearly perfect, just the color is wrong. Bella breathed as she stared at it. Edward stepped next to her, wrapped his arms around her waist and put his hand over her bump. For a minute he just looked at the crib before he spoke. Yes, the crib is really something special. And if you want it, I'll have the coating changed. What do you want? White. but maybe it would be nice if the vein would still be visible. Edward could already picture it. It'll look great. I have to say, Mrs. Cullen, that you have great taste. Let's look for the matching pieces. He guided Bella through the rows of furniture and soon they'd found a changing table, a wardrobe, a dresser and a bookshelf. Edward quickly called the young man, who'd showed them the way and asked him to have everything delivered to Cullen Furniture. Bella was very happy with her selection and even more happy that it had been completely stressless. "Hey Edward," Bella asked one the way home. "Do you know the history of the crib?" That was something Bella was really interested in. She knew that the Cullens were very aware of their family history and had many pictures, paintings and journals, so it wouldn't be unusual for Edward to know something about the crib and the rest of the furniture. "I do, but I need to look through some journals to get the names correct. If I'm not completely wrong, then the crib and everything else we've selected today is about 150 years old." That old? Bella was surprised. She didn't want to think of the monetary value of the pieces, maybe they were even priceless. Antiques. Edward, who'd heard the pitch in Bella's voice and could guess what it was about, smiled at her reassuringly. "Yes, but don't worry. I doubt our child will manage to damage them beyond repair them. I think our crib belonged to a little girl that was yes, the first child of the patriarch at the time. If I remember correctly, the head of house adored his daughter, and, if what was written is correct, she was also the smartest child. She was married to a distant cousin who thought working with his hands was beneath him, and instead of letting his favorite child have to do with a bought crib, the patriarch did it himself." "Wow, you really know a lot about your family's history," Bella said and was rather impressed. Her family had only told her the political and social connections, but Bella thought these little stories were much more interesting and even important. "Well, the journals are really interesting. You can read some yourself if you want, and don't worry, Pop let some history students at Harvard and God knows where transcribe some of them. You won't have to deal with the originals." While Bella was glad that she wouldn't have to try to decipher the handwritings of the late Cullens, she would love to see the originals. "Could I still see them? I promise to handle them with care." Bella was well aware that old papers were fragile and could be easily damaged, but she really wanted to hold them herself. "Of course, most are at the manor. But I do have a handful of copies at home. I'll get them as soon as we're back." Bella couldn't wait to get her hands on them. And then she had an idea. Wouldn't it be great to write the history of the Cullens down and to publish it? Or maybe one edition for the family and one for the public. Yes, that was something she needed to think about. 1 week later Bella visited Jane. She needed to get out of the house and someone to talk to who wouldn't be averse to hearing her cuss and not constantly remind her to stay calm. The reason why Bella needed such a person was simple. 5 days ago the media published an article about Bella's pregnancy. Someone had seen them at the store and reported it, and soon after paparazzi were tailing her. Sadly, they managed to get a picture of her that showed Bella's ever-growing bump. And there was no way that she could say that she'd just gained some weight. The shape of the belly was pretty telling. Apparently, the media didn't have something more newsworthy and reported about her and her child every single day. Edward had to coax her into agreeing to release a statement which confirmed the pregnancy. Bella hadn't wanted to say she thought it was none of their damn business. Everyone had hoped that if the Cullens provided the media with some information that they would stop digging. Well, they'd been wrong. Now everyone knew that they'd been at the store and what they'd looked at and, even more important, what they'd bought. And to Bella's immense surprise, some of these items were completely unknown to Bella, and quite ugly. What angered Bella even more were the statements of people close to the couple. No one, absolutely no one, who really was close to them would dare to speak to the press. And every single one of their employees would face a lawsuit should they decide to sell their information. Because of all this, Bella was happy to see her friend. While Jane would still look after her friend and make sure that she didn't overdid it, she was way more relaxed and knew that Bella needed to blow off some steam. Jane made sure that Bella had enough of her favorite sweets and latest cravings before she let her friend run wild. Bella complained for over an hour over the reporters and paparazzi and cursed them all to hell and wished them very unpleasant rashes. Once she was done with that topic, she started with the unsatisfying selections of prams she'd found so far. I mean, I know that dark colors are easier to handle and you don't see every single spot, but come on. Gray, brown and black. No light colors, no nice patterns. I'm beyond frustrated. I refuse to buy some ugly pram for my child. Bella was flushed and paused to take a breather and to stuff some more chocolate into her mouth. Jane watched her friend in amusement. It was very entertaining to see her so emotional. Bella might not like being pregnant, but it proved to be very entertaining for Jane. Yes, I can see why that would frustrate you. I also browsed through the web and looked at some prams and have to agree with you. Luckily for you, I called one of my friends who has a 1-year-old daughter and asked for her help. She told me that you should look at some European models. Apparently, she got one herself and is in love with it. She sent some prospects for you. As Jane had expected, Bella cheered up when she heard that. And together they worked through the prospects. It only took them another hour before Bella had found 3 models that she would love for her baby. I need to send you friends some thank you chocolate. These are perfect. Bella gushed after she'd put the prospects into her handbag so that she could show them Edward. Now all we need to do is paint the walls and furnish the room. Oh, I didn't know that you were already that far ahead. Quote, well, we still need to buy some clothes and diapers and stuff like that. But now that I know what pram I want, we have all the big things. I want to have the nursery ready before I enter my 7th month. Just in case of something unexpected happening, you know. Jane nodded at her friend's foresight. I think that is a good idea. That way you won't have worry about anything later on, and you won't have to trust Edward or someone else to do things right. Yes, that was one reason why Bella had wanted to get everything ready as soon as possible. She loved Edward, but she wanted to plan and decorate the nursery. Now Edward and I just have to agree on a name. That won't be easy. I doubt it ever is, Jane agreed. But you have still time, and should Edward have reservations about your choice, just wait until you're in labor. He can't refuse you while you're birthing his child. Jane, Bella exclaimed and pushed her friend playfully. That's mean and completely unfair. I love it. The two women talked a little longer about some new project of Jane. She had been offered to do a photo shoot for some new book about their lifestyle. Even though Ella wasn't really into that kind of thing, she asked Jane to show her the photos when they were done. It was shortly before Bella wanted to leave that she remembered something. Hey, Jane, I haven't heard anything from my family since the news about the baby came out, and they didn't comment on it. That's kind of strange. Bella, did you forget that I threatened them while you were at the hospital? Jane asked her friend and studied her nails. She looked completely nonchalant, and that worried Bella. No, I do remember that, but I also know my family and they wouldn't have simply backed off. So, what did you do? Jane raised her head and tried to look innocent, but Bella knew Jane better than that. Me? Why would you think that I've something to do with it? Bella didn't answer and just gave her friend a pointed look. Jane kept the facade for about 5 seconds before an evil smirk appeared on her angelic face. Okay, yes, I made sure that you family remembered my words. I may have sent them some compromising pictures. I'm sure I'm going to regret it, but I have to ask. What kind of pictures? Well, you family isn't nearly as proper as they want other people to believe. Renee, for example, had an affair with a young Puerto Rican gardener. So cliché. I'm disappointed. Bella's eyes nearly popped out of her as she heard that. What? Are you serious? Sadly, yes, Jane said and shook her head. And she didn't even really try to keep it hidden. It was ridiculously easy to catch them and to take a few pictures. I sent them to her as a little reminder. But Tyler's secret entertained me so much more. Bella couldn't understand what her idiot of a brother could have done to make Jane look like a cat with a canary in its mouth. Don't torture me, Jane, and just spit it out. Jane pouted. Oh, you're no fun. Okay. Well, Tyler had a little too much fun during his college years. Of course it wouldn't be surprising if it had just been women and alcohol, but your brother also tried out various drugs. And during one wild party he ended in bed with someone. No, thought Bella, I'm sure Jane won't tell me that my 100% straight brother. This someone was male and as gay as a rainbow. And a top. Okay. Bella had expected something like this, but not that Tyler would have bottomed. Bella was frozen for a few seconds before she started laughing. Bella didn't know how Jane had that one out, but she was absolutely certain that Tyler would do anything to keep this dirty secret hidden and forgotten. Well, Bella said once she'd gotten her laughter under control and wiped the tears of her face. I guess I won't have to fear that my family will ever say something about me again. No, Jane agreed. You won't, not if the Swans don't want me to air their dirty secrets. God, Jane is the best friend a girl could ask for. After Bella's very entertaining and satisfying afternoon with Jane, she came home with a large smile on her face. Edward, even though he was suspicious of her mood, thought it best not to comment on it and just enjoyed it. He feared that it wouldn't be too long before there would be a new problem. And he was right. 9 days. For 9 days Edward enjoyed yet Bella's pleasant mood and her steadily increasing libido, but on the 9th day Bella came to him carrying a book that every man on the planet should fear. A name book. Shit. Fuck. Why now? Why me? God. Why did Bella have to burst our perfect little bubble? Bella didn't sense anything of her husband's growing distress. She was looking forward to talk about the name for her sweet little girl. So, Edward, it's high time that we decide on a name. One never knows when our daughter will decide to make her big entrance. Edward grimaced but had to admit that Bella did have a point. Yes, I guess you're right. And just so you know, I have thought about names before today. Just without a book. With that comment, Bella knew that Edward didn't like the book. Well, his bad. Bella thought the book really helpful, and some women from her birthing course had recommended this book to her and it was really great. Well, I don't care if you don't like my book, but let me tell you that I found it really good. I found some really nice names. Quote, knowing that it would be better to not argue with her, he just smiled. I'm sure of that. Well, let's hear it then. What do you think of Gwendolyn? Edward early chalked on his coke when he heard Bella's suggestion. After he'd cleared his airways he stared at Bella like she was crazy. Gwendolyn, he asked her disbelievingly. I know that old-fashioned names are back in fashion, but come on. Our daughter won't be able to write it and some won't even be able to say it. No, I'm putting a veto on it. Gwendolyn is a beautiful old English name. A classic. Bella huffed but realized that Edward wouldn't budge. I don't care. Name another one. Edward crossed his arms across his chest and set his mouth in a tight line. Okay, but I just want you to know that I really like this one. Another one I like is Kate, or Catherine. Edward thought about that one for a moment before he answered. Sound okay, but somehow I can't imagine naming our daughter it. And there are so many of them. What about Maya? I like that. Something else and different. Do we want only one name or two? In Edward's family it was tradition to have 2 names and he really wanted to keep it. But of course only if Bella agreed. Well, I just assumed that she would have 2 names. To be completely honest, Bella hadn't even thought of just giving her daughter one name. For her it was just something you did without thinking. A relic of her upbringing. That's good, at least we won't have to argue about that. Edward sighed and gave his wife a quick kiss. But please, promise me that no one gets a say in the naming of our baby. I know that my family can be really overbearing, but this is one occasion where their opinion isn't important or even wanted. Ella grinned as she listened to Edward speak. It was undeniable that Edward was a family man, who loved and cherished his family very much, and because of that Bella had feared that Edward would listen or even ask the opinion of the Cullens. But just as the nursery, Bella wanted to choose the name of her first child without any input from any outstanding persons. I'm happy to hear that, but that doesn't make choosing a name any easier. Especially because you don't like my choices very much. Please, Bella, we both know that it's quite normal for parents to argue when it comes to choosing the baby's name. She really hated it when Edward was right and this time he was. Bella had heard some really horrible stories and she dearly hoped that they wouldn't have that much of a hard time. Bella W. As still thinking about some of the more funny stories the women at the birthing course had told her, when Edward's voice pulled her out of her mind. What do you think of Ella? Bella cocked her head to the side and repeated the name several times in her mind. Unusual but classic. Not something many people would name their daughter, but I like it. How come you chose that one? Edward, while he was happy that Bella liked his choice, was a little embarrassed about why he'd brought the name into the game. Well, you see, Pops had many friends and a lot of them weren't Americans. When I was about 7, a couple visited my grandparents. They were from Germany and the woman was a truly fascinating and beautiful woman. It was funny to see how uncomfortable Edward was. Bella thought it was like Lee that this Ella had been Edward's first crush. But that didn't bother Bella. No, she thought it was cute. And why was she so fascinating? It's rather uncommon for you to say something like this. Quote, that may be true, but she really was a great woman. You have to understand that she was born in the early 30s and she survived the war. Her family wasn't rich and she didn't have the best education, but somehow she managed to teach herself everything one could need. After the war she met a young man. He came from old money and during the war many of his family died and so it came that Fritz was suddenly responsible for the 3 children of his brother and cousin. To say that he had been overwhelmed would have been a gross understatement. He was mourning his family and the children were traumatized. There wasn't anyone who could really help him and slowly the situation got worse. The nanny was unable to deal with the children and Fritz was very busy making sure that their business survived he after war time and that they wouldn't lose all their money. It was a hard time. One day the children ran or the nanny simply lost them. I'm not entirely sure which way it was, but suddenly the children were gone. Bella gasped. She couldn't even imagine how worried this Fritz must have been. Anything could have happened to the children. Germany hadn't been a safe place for children to wander around. Intensely, she continued to listen to Edward's story. Fritz was out of his mind with worry and immediately started searching for them. While he and many others were looking for the children, Ella found 3 lost and teary children. Of course, at first she reassured herself that they were unharmed and healthy, but then she tore them a new one. As soon as she was done with that she marched the 3 troublemakers back home, where Fritz had just returned. As soon as he saw the children he rushed to them and hugged and kissed them. Ella waited a few moments but then she demanded that the children apologized for causing trouble and for worrying their uncle. She must have been a sight to behold because Fritz was so impressed that he nearly begged her to stay and to help him with the children. Ella agreed, but only after lots of arguing, and then she started managing the house and the family. She didn't only take care of the children, no, she also made sure that Fritz took care of himself and spend some time with the children. Well, she acted like his wife and after only 3 months he asked for her hand. They had a strong and happy marriage but it was undeniable that Ella was the head of the family. She took care that her husband never overdid it and never forgot to enjoy life. Everyone liked and admired her. I would want our daughter to be a woman like her. That I can understand, Bella said. This Ella sounded like a woman Bella would have liked to know. And I think our little one would be honored to carry the name of such a strong woman. But we still need a second name. Really? Edward asked and stared at her with huge and surprised eyes. You really would want to name our baby Ella? Yes. Good. But please, leave the second name for a different day. Bella pouted and seriously considered to continue. Edward must have seen it and decided it would be best to distract her. Before Bella could even answer he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her. Bella, whose hormones were doing overtime work, abandoned any plans she might have had for the next hours and decided to ravish her husband. Both were very happy with that plan. Bella was on her way back from one of her meetings at Phoenix when Kate called her. She was in her 30th week now, and Edward and nearly everyone else, her doctor included, had made it clear that driving wasn't in her best interest. And not only because the huge stomach was getting in the way. Bella hadn't liked that one bit, but even though it was hard for her, she could listen to reason. And so she hadn't argued and just accepted that. Something that had shocked everyone who knew her. Bella tried to not be insulted by that, but it was hard. So now, Bella was driven everywhere by Bubba, and he made sure to take very good care of her. "Hey Kate." Bella answered her phone. "What can I do for you?" "Oh Bella, I'm so sorry for calling you, but I have a little problem, but I need to get something from grocery store." Kate sounded truly sorry, but Bella had no problem with Kate calling her. Yes, Kate was paid to take care of the house, but it was still Bella's and Edward's house. "Don't worry, Kate, just tell me what you need. Are you on the way home?" "Yes, we are and should be home in about 20 minutes. Kate exhaled relieved. "Oh perfect. I need some cream and lemons. Somehow I must have forgotten them." "How?" "I don't know, because I plan to make lemon mousse." Bella laughed as she heard Kate's frustrated growl. It was liberating to know that she wasn't the only one who forgot the most obvious and important things. "No problem, Kate. You'll have your lemons and cream in less than an hour." "Thanks, Bella, but I promise that everything else will be done by the time you're home." That Bella didn't doubt that for one moment. Today Edward and Bella had invited everyone home for a not baby shower. Bella hadn't wanted to party where dozen of women owed and ought, and because of that they'd decided to invite their family and best friends to a nice barbecue. Bella asked Bubba to stop at the grocery store and quickly jumped inside, well, as quickly as someone as pregnant as she could, and grabbed the lemons and some cream. On an impulse she got some grapefruit juice and headed to the register. Bella was just a few feet away when a horribly familiar and haughty voice stopped her. Well, if T. Hat isn't the whore that has stolen my man." Bella took one deep breath and decided against turning around. Nothing good could come from talking to this person. Without acknowledging said person, Bella continued, but didn't manage to take more than 2 steps before she was forcefully turned around and came face to face with Tanya Denali. And the day had been so good, Bella thought, and tried not to grimace. She wouldn't give Tanya the satisfaction of knowing that she was the last person on earth Bella wanted to see. "Good day, Tanya." Bella greeted her friendly and took in her appearance. Discreetly, of course. Tanya still looked beautiful, but also a little artificial. If Bella wasn't wrong, then Tanya had visited a plastic surgeon since she'd last seen her. Her nose was straighter and her breasts were bigger. Those changes didn't make her more beautiful though, at least in Bella's opinion. It was obvious that Tanya had let someone lay hand on her. Her clothes were still very fashionable, a little too much for a normal afternoon. If her neckline had been just 1 or 2 inches lower, Bella would have been able to see her nipples. Something she had absolutely no interest in. At all. Tanya's normally beautiful face contorted into a sneer as she regarded Bella's huge belly. "You've gotten fat since our last meeting. I don't think that Edward still finds you attractive now that you've letting yourself go." "There's nothing attractive about you now." Bella barely contained an eye roll at the immature barbs against her figure and general outward appearance. "Well, things like that happen when one is pregnant." A pitying smile graced her lips when Tanya answered. "Pregnancy is no excuse to look fat and unkempt. Hundreds of women still look beautiful despite their pregnancy. I guess it just doesn't suit you." Bella knew what Tanya was trying to do, and although she found her silly and insulting, she smiled. "That may be, but that's something Edward and I can live with very well. And it's only for a little while. Only if you manage to lose those 30 or 40 pounds you've gained," Tanya scoffed. Bella hadn't gained nearly as much but didn't comment on it. "Well, it was nice seeing you again. But sadly I've got to go." Just as Bella turned around and thought that Tanya would just let her leave, yes, that had been rather naive, the whore decided to throw something else at her. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts. I plan to make your life very uncomfortable." Just because Alec and Edward tried to shut me up, doesn't mean that I'm just going to hush. I'm going to meet with a very nice and important reporter tomorrow. The interview will cover how horrible Edward treated me in the start of your marriage. And there is nothing you can do about it. Okay. Now the whore was pissing her off. Bella knew that Alec had finally divorced her and that he'd given Tanya a lot of money to shut her up. But the money had come with a condition. Tanya wasn't allowed to talk about Edward, Bella, or her marriage to Alec. Should Tanya break this agreement, then she would lose all her money. Tanya knew that, and Bella couldn't understand why she would be jeopardizing it for some silly revenge. Well, Bella knew that Tanya wasn't the brightest candle on the cake, but even she was surprised by that much stupidity. Do that, Bella calmly commented after she'd managed to hide her surprise and dread. She really didn't want to be in the news again. I hope the reporter is willing to pay you a fortune, or you're going to lose a lot of money. Apparently that wasn't the reaction Tanya had aimed for, and her face contorted into an enraged grimace. I don't care, she spat at Bella. The interview is just the beginning. Soon everyone will want to talk to me. And they will pay me OD money to get some dirt on the famous Cullen family. Oh, Bella didn't doubt that many magazines and talk shows would love to talk to Tanya, but she seriously doubted that they would pay her the millions that Alec had. But that wasn't Bella's problem, and like always the media would soon tire of the story and move on to something more scandalous. I wish you good luck with that, Bella said and walked away. An angry growl startled Bella and she quickly stepped aside, and that movement made Tanya, who'd tried to push Bella, miss her. Tanya stumbled forward and landed in an arrangement of Coca-Cola bottles. At first nothing happened, but then about a dozen bottles exploded and showered Tanya. For one moment Bella was too shocked to react, but then she burst out laughing and had to hold her producing stomach as it shook with laughter. Tanya looked like a drowned cat and just as pissed. An employee of the store ran to Tanya, and Bella decided that now was the perfect time to take her leave. She paid and hurried for her waiting car. Bubba was about to search for her as she got into the car. Still laughing, Bella was unable to answer any of Bubba's questions, but managed to assure him that she was fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Edward was working on some papers when his wife returned. What struck him as strange was the happy, nearly gleeful smile on her face, and that she was humming. Kate also noticed her overly happy demeanor. She asked for the reason, but Bella just shook her head and went to her husband. Kate shrugged at Edward's questioning look and went back to her preparations. Hello, my beautiful husband, Bella trilled as she kissed him. How is your day? Apparently not nearly as good as your day. I'm pretty sure that your good mood hasn't anything to do with work. So what brought such a smile to your face? Bella laughed happily and shook her head. No, sorry, not going to tell you. Yet, you'll have to wait until our guests are here. I don't want to tell the same story twice, and the others should hear it, too. The answer didn't satisfy him, but he knew his wife's stubbornness only too well and was aware that Bella wouldn't tell him anything until she was ready. Okay, I'm willing to wait, but only if you promise that you will definitely tell me. That was something she could do. Promise. Edward and Bella left Kate to prepare everything for their barbecue while they went upstairs to get cleaned up and to get changed. Bella watched her husband as he showered and decided it was a good idea to join him. She quickly got rid of her clothes and stepped into the shower. Startled, Edward turned around as he felt cool air hit his warmed skin. Well, Mrs. Cullen, what can I do for you? Edward asked as he stared at his wife's naked and very sexy body. I want to shower, Bella answered innocently, and started to lather herself with her hands. She felt eyes following her hands as she first washed her breasts and then let her hands wander between her legs. Are you trying to tell me something, Bella? Edward's voice had gotten hoarse, and Bella smiled, because she was sure that her husband was already hard and ready to go. If I really need to say it, then we have some serious problems. That was everything Edward needed to hear, and he didn't waste any more time. 1 second Bella was still washing herself, and the next Edward paused her so that she wouldn't hurt herself before he thrust inside her. Their coupling was fast and hot, and exactly what Bella had wanted. After both had finished showering, this time for real, and gotten dressed, Edward asked why she'd decided to seduce him. Well, Bella answered, I wanted to feel just how much my husband wants me and to remind myself that I'm one lucky woman. That didn't really explain anything for Edward, but he decided against asking her for another explanation and chose to wait for Bella's story that she wanted to tell. He had an inkling that the two things were connected. Soon after they returned downstairs and both were impressed by Kate's work. Everything seemed to be done. The table outside was laid, the drinks were cool and the barbecue was ready for use. So, you two, I'm done for tonight, Kate commented from behind. The Cullens turned around and saw that she'd already grabbed her purse and was indeed ready to go. Thanks, Kate, Bella said as she went to hug Kate. Everything looks great. You did an amazing job. Oh please, that's nothing. The desserts are in the fridge and I wish you a pleasant night and lots of fun. I'm going to see you tomorrow then. Are you sure that you and Garrett don't want to eat with us? Bella asked for the last time. She'd tried to get them to join but both had declined. They wanted to spend their night in front of the fire. Very. I plan to have some fun with my husband, Kate said with a wink and left. Not even 10 minutes later the first guests arrived and soon everyone was seated and happily devouring the food that Kate had cooked for them. Well, most of it, Edward and the men still had the pleasure of grilling the meat. Edward managed to stay patient for nearly 2 hours before he demanded to hear why Bella had been in such a good mood today. Once again a pleased smile crossed her face and then she told her family about her unwanted reunion with Tanya Denali. At first most were angry that had Tanya dared to speak to Bella that way. Especially because she hadn't really done something to her. But by the time she'd come to the part with the cola everyone was roaring with laughter. It's a sham. That you didn't manage to make a picture or, even better, a video of that stunt. It must have been a Kodak moment, Emmett said once he was able to speak again. You're right, Jasper said, who sat next to Alice and had one arm wrapped around her. He'd finally caved to Alice, advances and both were happily dating. The rest of the family was rather smug because they'd known it would come that way. But I'm worried about the interview Tanya wants to give. I fear that it's too late to stop her, even if I would start working on it right away. Don't worry about her, Bella said to everyone's surprise. Let her do her interviews. Soon enough no one will want to talk to her. It doesn't matter if she tells everyone her version. We're happy and it doesn't matter much how our marriage started. Edward was happy to hear Bella say that and grabbed her hand in a possessive gesture. I'm happy that you think so, but I don't want to stress you unnecessarily. I would rather it happened now and we know that it's going to happen, than to be taken by surprise. Now we can be prepared. Carlisle watched his son and wife with pride and happiness. Never had he thought that things would work out that well. I think Bella is right. Now we know that it's going to happen and we can take precautions. I agree and we're all going to help. And as an added bonus, it'll put the Swans in a bad light. That comment came from Jane and it surprised no one that she looked happy about putting the Swans in their place. And your grandfather wouldn't care either if he were still alive, Elizabeth added. Her husband had planned all this and he must have known that at some point something like this would have happened. Okay. Then it's decided then, Bella said in an evil smile. Well, Tanya, let's see what you've got. The family decided that for today they would just enjoy their time together and tomorrow they would call Alec Volturi and Mrs. Hensley, the PR expert of Cullen Corp. Everyone agreed that they would need help because there was no saying just what Tanya would be saying to the medias. And that was what they did. Alec wasn't really surprised about his ex-wife's plans and immediately called his own lawyer. As it turned out, Mrs. Hensley, when she arrived that afternoon, came well prepared. She'd long ago expected something like that and had several options for Edward and Bella. One of them was to go public and to give an interview of their own. Edward rejected that idea without really thinking about it. Edward, don't make any hasty decisions, Bella contradicted him. People Going to love that interview, and the media will be full with speculations and accusations. We're going to be bombarded with interview requests. We'll have to say something. Mrs. Cullen is correct. Mrs. Hensley agreed and sent Bella a thankful smile. She was prepared to fight Edward on this, but she was happy that Bella was being reasonable about this. It's impossible for the media and the pub not to want to hear your side of the story. They can want all they want. Edward snapped and glared at Mrs. Hensley. Bella discreetly rolled her eyes at her husband's pigheadedness. This whole mess is only going to stress Bella, and I want to minimize that as much as possible. Bella put her hand on Edward's, which was on the table in front of him, in a tight fist. It's sweet of you that you want to protect me, but you have to see that this will stress me no matter what, and the only thing we can do is to deal with it the best way possible. And that means listening to your PR expert. Edward grimaced, but Bella was glaring at him, daring him to contradict her and at the same time promising him pain should he do it. He managed to hold his grimace for about 10 seconds before his posture softened and he smiled lovingly at Bella. Did I ever tell you just how much I love your fierceness and rationality? Bella raised one unimpressed eyebrow. Several times, in fact, and that won't change my opinion. Mrs. Hensley suppressed an amused giggle and waited for the couple to be done. Which it was just a moment later. Okay, you're right, but how do we manage to minimize Bella's stress? I know these reporters and other scum. They won't stop bothering us until they've got what they want or until a better story comes up. That's easy. At first we'll wait for the interview and see just what Miss Denali has told them, and a few hours later, at the least, I'll be getting calls from various newspapers and talk shows. Don't forget that they want something from us and not the other way around. We'll be able to pick the best offer, and I think we can demand a thing or two. Edward still looked skeptical. And what would we demand? The location, for example. Cullen Manor would be the perfect place. Enough space, and you're familiar with the rooms and feel comfortable there. We could make sure that only people we want would be at the interview, and we could search everyone so that there wouldn't be any unwanted devices. Mrs. Cullen could take a break whenever she should need one, and we wouldn't have to deal with the masses in front of the building. You could stay at the manor for a day or two. Mrs. Hensley had spoken calmly, and her demeanor spoke of confidence. She seemed to believe that Edward and Bella would see the many benefits of her plan. And they did. Both had listened attentively, and now they were looking at each other, silently communicating with the other. Edward, once again, seemed to be reluctant, but Bella loved the plan and wanted Edward to agree with it. In the end, Edward did agree. He and Mrs. Hensley talked for over an hour of their options and how to best handle the interview. After that, Mrs. Hensley called Alex's lawyer and informed him of their plans. He reported the plan and promised to stay in contact. Then all they could do was wait. They didn't have to wait long though. Just a few days later, an interview appeared in one of the most popular magazines. 3 pages of nothing but brainless drivel. With pictures. The family and everyone else read it, and though some of it was true, Tanya had made sure that she was portrayed as the injured party. Innocent of all malicious acts and cast aside by a mean and unfeeling Edward. It was entertaining to read, and Bella did laugh more than once, much to Edward's confusion. Yes, Bella would have been very happy if there never would have been an interview, but it could have been worse. She wasn't ashamed of the beginning of their marriage. It hadn't been their plan to enter into an arranged marriage, but they had agreed to it to achieve their goals, and they had found love. All in all, it hadn't been a bad deal, and just because today most people married for love, and even more often for lust, it hadn't been long ago that marriages like their own had been the norm. It could have been much worse. Bella tried to soothe her husband while he glared at the magazine. She spoke of the arrangement between our families and your relationship, but there's nothing too embarrassing in it, like your sexual preferences and other dark secrets. I think this interview just makes her look spiteful and like a gold digger. Did you realize that she didn't mention her marriage or the abortion? They were the main reasons why she couldn't aim higher than she did. If she hadn't been married, she would have wanted to get your ring on her finger as soon as possible. Edward grimaced as he listened to his wife's reasonings. You're right. I should be thankful that she was still married, but I doubt that I would have asked her. It was never something serious with her. I can't believe that I was in any kind of relationship with her. Tanya was never more than a gold digger and was a horny idiot for not having seen it. For one moment he seemed to be lost in his memories before he shook his head and gave Bella a bemused smile. I was such a fool. Bella wrapped her arms around his waist and snugged against his chest. Well, we all make mistakes. It's just that not everyone learns from them. That's true. Mrs. Hensley called Edward just about an hour later and was excited to tell him that they had already some very good requests. One of those was from America's favorite talk shows. Suzanne Melling's show was not only good, but she'd also managed to get nearly everyone important or famous into her show. Anyo. Their reason why she was so popular was because it wasn't just tacky gossip. Mrs. Mellings and her team researched every guest very thoroughly and asked intelligent questions. Bella and Edward were said to hear that she was interested in an interview with them. Edward asked Mrs. Hensley to arrange everything and to report the final agreement. She promised to do just that, and before she hung up she advised the couple to stay clear of any gossip websites and the social medias. It seemed that people already thought that they had to comment. And some were very mean and just offensive. That wasn't a problem for either of them, as they tended to avoid both. Neither Bella nor Edward had a Facebook account and didn't plan to change that. Ever. During the day they talked to some of the family and their closest friends about the article. Jane found the whole thing just stupid and blown out of proportion, while Alice was cursing Tanya to hell and back. Bella didn't care and just waited for Mrs. Hensley to call back. Edward, who was more calm than anyone had expected, was still angry. At Tanya, but mostly at himself. He knew that this mess was mostly his fault because he had been so angry about the marriage that he'd wanted to keep his affair with Tanya going. He hadn't cared about Bella's feelings at the beginning, and that was what bothered him the most. At the time he hadn't understood, or hadn't wanted to understand, why Emmett, Rose and Nana had been so displeased with him about his behavior. Now though, Edward was surprised that none of them hadn't knocked him some. While Bella understand his feelings and also welcomed some of them, because it showed just how much Edward had changed, she didn't want him to brood too much over it. They'd talked about it and found a solution that they could live with, and they were happy. For Bella that topic was closed. A few hours later the lawyers and Mrs. Hensley reported that they'd come to a satisfying agreement, and in 2 days they welcomed Suzanne Mellings and her team at the manor for a live interview. Bella was really nervous about that part, but she understood that this way there would be no way to put words in their mouths. Edward still wasn't overly pleased but was resigned to his fate. And so the staff of the manor prepared everything, and late afternoon of the day of the interview Edward and Bella got prepared and prepped by an army of people. Bella was shocked to see just how much people were needed for just one measly interview. It was lucky that the manor was so huge, or it would have been difficult to fit the necessary people in the sitting room. What was a pleasant surprise was Suzanne Mellings herself. She was a 52-year-old woman with blonde curls and bright brown eyes. Her friendly and easygoing demeanor was able to put most around her immediately at ease. Edward and Bella watched from the side how Suzanne began her show. After she'd announced the special location for today's show, she began with 2 short segments before it was time for the Cullens to enter the picture. I think we've all read or at least heard about the interview of Tanya Denali, Suzanne said. It was surprising that one of America's favorite couples are not a love match but only married because of an arrangement between their families. Now we know about one side, but Edward and Bella Cullen had given no comment. Until now. Today I have the great pleasure of hearing the other side of the story. I welcome our hosts, Edward and Bella Cullen. Bella hoped that the makeup was good or everyone see just how much she could blush. Edward wore a nice but casual suit and Bella had decided to wear a dark blue maternity dress. It emphasized her enlarged breasts, but it also made her belly less obvious. They greeted Suzanne and then took their seats. Well, I have to say that I feel quite honored. Normally you two don't give any interviews, especially in your family home. Bella took a deep breath. You can do that, Bella. Just ignore the cameras and the other people, she prepped herself and then smiled at Suzanne. Yes, that's right. I treasure my privacy very much and Edward feels much the same. Here, Edward nodded and put a calming hand on her knee. But we thought it best to change that, considering that we would have to comment the interview if we want to have our peace ever again. Suzanne nodded at that. Only too true. The social networks are overflowing with people's opinions and questions. Now, what interests me the most is if your marriage was truly arranged by your families. It sounds so antiquated. Yes, that is true. Our grandfathers arranged the whole thing and were left to deal with it, Edward announced with a wry smirk. Shocked, Suzanne stared at both of them before she asked her next question. Why did they do that and why did you agree to such an agreement? That's most unusual. Again it was Edward that answered and Bella decided it was best to let him lead the conversation for now. Well, I was very serious and focused during my younger years and my grandfather always thought that it would have been better for me to let loose while I was in college, but being the stubborn idiot that I was, I thought I knew better. Turns out that he knew me better than I myself. I was in my mid-20s when I started behaving like a college boy. Completely stupid, of course, but I felt I needed it. While I was still very professional and concentrated at work, Pops thought it was time to push my life back on tracks. Sadly, he died before he could tell me anything about it. And I had to find out from his will about his plans. Needless to say that I was less than pleased, but because I wanted to lead our business I agreed grudgingly. I wasn't really nice when I met Bella for the first time. But I was surprised and impressed. Edward threw Bella a sheepish look and she had to smile at the memory of their first meeting. Yes, Edward hadn't expected her to behave too reasonable and calm. Suzanne watched them and thought to herself that it was obvious to anyone who cared that there was a deep connection between them. That's quite a story, Edward. Do you know why your grandfather chose Bella? Did you know each other before in some kind of way? No, to both questions. Pops didn't leave any explanation behind and not even my grandmother knows why he chose Bella. All I know is that he made a very good choice. Quote. Suzanne nodded at that and then turned to Bella. Okay, now we know why Edward agreed to this arrangement, but why did you decide to adhere your family's wishes? As far as I know you don't have a really close relationship with them. Bella smiled at that comment. It seemed that the well-placed comments around certain people had reached more ears than Bella had hoped. Yes, that is certainly true. My family and I don't see eye to eye. We want different things in life and treasure things that the other believes to be unimportant. I never did what my F.A. Miley expected of me and rather chose to do things that would make me happy. Understandable, Suzanne agreed. But that doesn't explain why you agreed when your family told you the news about your marriage to Edward Cullen. Not that women wouldn't kill to be in your shoes. That made Bella laugh because it reminded her of some of the daughters of the better families who'd watched Bella to envious or baleful eyes. Oh, I'm sure of that, but sadly, they won't get the chance as I plan to stay with Mr. Cullen. But back to your question. Edward's and mine's situation weren't all that different. I'm Sir. You know that I founded a publishing house together with my friends Ben and Angela. Oh yes, and it's already making a name for itself. I loved Inheritance of Light and can't wait until you publish the next book. But now, please, continue, Suzanne said eagerly. She looked impatient and that curious look on her face amused Bella greatly. As you can guess, you need a lot of money to start your own business. I was surprised when my grandfather offered to give me the needed money. I agreed but regretted it later when I was told that I had to either agree to the marriage or I would have to pay the money back. We would have been unable to pay our employees, authors and partners. That was one thing, but Jeffrey Swan also made it clear that should I refuse to marry Edward then he would use his many connections to make my life very unpleasant. I know that many people won't understand why I chose to marry Edward, but for me it was the best option, as it would also free me of the family that had proven that they cared more for their own personal gain than for the happiness of their child. And I never regretted that decision. Suzanne gaped at her and needed a moment to pull herself together. Well, I guess it's time for a break, and after that you have to tell us how exactly you made this marriage work. Bella was relieved when they were told that the cameras were off, and she immediately got up and grabbed something to drink. Edward followed her after he'd excused them. "How are you feeling?" he asked as he wrapped his arms around Bella and put his hands on her huge stomach. Content. Bella leant back and enjoyed the feeling of her husband's firm chest behind her. "I feel fine. Not stressed and not even nervous anymore. Suzanne is a really nice woman and Mrs. Hensley did a good job at choosing her." Bella felt him nodding. "Yes, I agree with you. She's very good and not overly eager to get some gossip material. But I have to say that I'm surprised that you said so much about your family. Aren't you worried about what they could reply to that?" Edward asked. He wouldn't put it past them to cause trouble for Bella. Or even to Sue. Not that they would get anywhere with it, because he would make sure of it. Bella laughed lightly at that, not because she found his concern funny but because she knew what would happen should they try to act against her. "Don't worry, Edward. EY have bigger things to worry about than this interview. Jane has dragged up some dirt that my family would do anything to keep secret." "Ah, I should have known. Jane mentioned something like that at the hospital. Well, one less thing for us to worry about." They ate a few snacks before they were called back. This time Bella was relaxed and ready to answer the questions Suzanne would be asking. After a few quick words from Suzanne, then they were back on topic and the story behind the whore's interview. "Okay, now we know how you two had gotten married but not how you've managed to make it work." Bella decided it was best if she answered that question. "Of course we wrote down a marriage contract and maybe it even helped that we didn't really know the other. There were no feelings involved. And yes, I do know what some people will say about this, but it hasn't been that long ago when love marriages were unusual and not the other way around. In some circles these traditions are still very much alive. Well, let me tell you that it's none of their business, and if people think that they have to tell us their opinion then I have to disappoint them, because we won't read one single letter or mail or however written comment," Bella said with a beaming smile, and that surprised both Edward and Suzanne. I guess you're right about the arranged marriages. I know that my own parents didn't have a true arranged marriage, but their families encouraged them very much. And I think it shows your strength that you don't care about people's opinions, but that leaves the question why we didn't know about Edward's. Well, affair." Edward looked uncomfortable and Bella grabbed his hand and smiled at him before she turned back to Suzanne and answered her question. "You have to understand that we didn't know the other and had no romantic feelings for each other. Edward had been in a relationship when the arrangement was announced and they didn't want to split. I had no problems with that." "What, are you serious?" Suzanne cried out and stared at her unbelievingly. "Yes, but because I hate to be in the spotlight, I only asked for Edward to be discreet and to respect me. I realized he had a few will see it as cheating, but I didn't, and that is the only opinion that matters here. Of course, our relationship wasn't without problems and we argued sometimes, but that was to be expected. Now I have to admit that it was naive to believe that our arrangement could work. The better Edward and I got along, the harder it became for their relationship." "That's correct," Edward sighed. "It was nearly impossible to manage both, and sometimes I broke promises which put a strain on all my relationships. My family was very displeased with me, and more than once I had to listen to their harsh words. Of course they were right and I did act like an idiot, but it needed time to see that, and luckily Bella was willing to be patient and wait. In the end I had to end my relationship. Yes, it wasn't a great situation, but there were no secrets. I have not always acted as I should have, but I was honest." That's a far cry from the story that was published. How do you explain the differences? Quote, "Feelings were hurt and sometimes you want someone to pay for it, but not everything is as it seems. It's not our story to tell, but we're allowed to say that there was another person involved who made it legally impossible for Edward to marry his partner. She was still married and Edward had no idea of that." Suzanne immediately straightened her posture and looked like a dog on the hunt. Really? Hat wasn't written in the interview, and I know that it also didn't come up during our research. How curious. Would you be willing to give us the name of the man in question? Edward and Bella shared a quick look before they focused back on Suzanne. Sadly, no, Edward sighed and smiled at Suzanne's disappointed face, although she hadn't expected anything else. We promised to leave this matter to him and we intend to keep it. It's his decision if he wants to go public or not, but he didn't want us to say more on the matter. Understandable, Suzanne agreed and closed this topic. After that she asked Dee some questions about the pregnancy, and soon enough the interview was over. Edward and Bella were relieved when it was over and sighed, which caused Suzanne to laugh. Oh, stop it, you two. You did very well and it wasn't that bad, was it? Quote, no, but I'm still happy that we're finished. This isn't something I'm really comfortable with, Bella admitted. Yes, some don't like being the center of attention, Suzanne agreed. But then she smiled. But I have to admit that you're good at it. Don't think that I didn't notice that neither of you mentioned the name Tanya Denali. I'm sure it'll piss her off. Impressive. Bella tried to look innocent. Why, that was just a coincidence. Everyone laughed at that and Bella would have loved to see the whore's reaction. But she didn't thought about that for long. When Mrs. Hensley arrived at their house the next day she was smiling from ear to ear. Bella had never seen her so happy. She hoped that was because the reactions to the interview were satisfying. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Cullen. Mrs. Hensley chirped. I come bearing good news. Very good ones. First let me tell you that I loved the interview and couldn't have planned it better. Mrs. Cullen, I have to say that I'm deeply impressed. You were just awesome and it seems that I'm not the only one who thinks that. The reactions to your interview are mostly good. Of course, there are some or spouting off incredible rude and hurtful things, but we can ignore them. Most important is though that now people want to know who this mysterious man is and what his history with Miss Denali is. They're doubting her now and more than a few are calling her a gold digger or other flattering things. I thinks it's safe to say that her plan backfired. If she's doing another interview then she'll be asked about Mr. Volturi. His lawyer called us this morning and congratulated us on a well-done interview. If I understood him correctly then Mr. Volturi plans to leak information of their marriage and the abortion. Oh, and the divorce agreement has already been dissolved. And Miss Denali has been informed. These are good news, Edward sighed. He looked very pleased. You did a great job. I have to say you're worth every cent I pay you. Quote, Mrs. Hensley seemed to grow a few inches as she heard that. Thank you, sir, but I'm only doing my job. Nonsense, he disagreed. I know when people are doing a good job and doing more than is expected of them. And you did that. By the way, do you know if Tanya has already tried to contact us? As you know I changed my phone numbers and her numbers were blocked. Oh yes, she did try. I think Jessica's ears are still ringing from her screeching. She thought you would be at work this morning and tried it at the office. I would suggest that you don't answer the phone if you don't know the number or if the number is suppressed. Bella agreed with this immediately. Good suggestion, Mrs. Hensley. Now please excuse me but the baby is dancing on my bladder. She admitted with a grimace and hurried out of the room. The laughters of Edward and Mrs. Hensley followed her. Mrs. Hensley's predictions proved to be correct and soon most people were interested in Alec Volturi and the baby that Tanya had aborted because it didn't fit into her life. People were shocked and disgusted, and while they didn't agree with Edward's actions and found both his and Bella's reasons for entering into a marriage flimsy, they were more interested in leading a witch hunt against Tanya. Tanya did give another interview and tried to explain her situation and even paint her as a misunderstood and confused woman, but that didn't work, and if Bella's information was correct then Tanya couldn't show her face in public. Some small part of Bella pitied her, but Tanya was responsible for this mess she was now in. And when she thought that the bitch had tried to push her then Bella thought that she deserved it. To everyone's surprise the Swans had indeed stayed quiet, but that didn't mean that they didn't have to deal with some Well, not so pleasant things. The friends of the Swans were shocked that they had quite literally forced Bella into her marriage, and that was so ing that not even the high society could approve of such tactics. Well, at least in public. And that meant that very few were willing to be seen with them. Because of that, the Swans had decided to take an extended vacation. It was rumored that they had left the country and wouldn't be back for few months. Bella was very pleased by that and basked in the knowledge that her family wouldn't be anywhere near her when it was time for her to give birth. Now that the problems were dealt with, all that was left to do was to make sure that Bella got enough clothes for little Ella and to relax. Yes, she was very happy. Bella hated heat. Well, not normally, but this year wasn't a normal year, and because of her added weight and larger than normal proportions, she started sweating rather easily these days. Together with her hormones and everything else, this was the worst summer Bella had lived through, and Edward had to suffer with her and all of her family and friends. During the hot days, Bella only wore the bare necessities and avoided leaving the house or going anywhere she would have to dress. No one cared about that and only smiled when Bella once again bemoaned the fact that she was heavily pregnant during the summer months. Autumn couldn't come soon enough this year, and Bella counted the days until it would get colder and the due date was near. Luckily, the nursery was ready for the LD, and the soon-to-be parents had bought enough clothes for their little princess. It was August and Bella was ready to pop. She didn't walk anymore. No, she was waddling. And she had huge problems getting her shoes on because of all the water in her hands and feet. She couldn't wear most of her shoes anymore and had to take off her wedding ring. Something that bothered Bella more than she could put into words. Today was once again a hot day, and Bella had an appointment with Dr. Summer, and that meant that she would have to wear nice clothes and, a bra. Bella, are you ready? Garrett is already waiting for us. We need to hurry, Edward called from downstairs where he was waiting for his wife. Bella growled under breath and threw the hairbrush aside. There was no way that she would look anywhere near pretty. I'm coming. Edward was nervously checking his watch when Bella came downstairs. Finally, the glare Bella shot him told Edward that he would be subjected to one of Bella's rants any second now. Well, excuse me for not being able to move as fast as normally. You might have missed it, but since the beginning of this pregnancy I've gained 23 pounds and therefore have a little trouble moving. And don't forget the huge belly that hosts your child. That also makes it harder to move, Bella snapped as she grabbed her purse and stalked outside without waiting for her husband. Garrett saw Bella leaving the house and immediately went to open the car for her. He also noticed the angry look on her face and decided to keep his mouth shut as much as he could. Hello, Bella. Hello, Garrett. It's nice to see that some men aren't insensitive assholes like my husband, Bella said as she got into the car. Garrett looked at Edward and raised a questioning eyebrow, but Edward just shook his head and quickly got into the car. The drive to the practice was mostly silent as Bella continued to fume and glare at everything in sight. As soon as they were at the practice, Edward jumped out of the car and opened Bella's door. He offered her his hand, and after another fierce glare Bella took it and let her husband walk her into the practice. Luckily, they didn't Avenue to wait and were immediately shown to the exam room. It didn't help that Bella had to get onto a scale which deepened her glare. Edward decided to make himself as small and silent as possible while they waited for the good doctor. Dr. Summer arrived 8 minutes later and was surprised by the tense air in the room. Edward gave her a sheepish smile as he greeted her while Bella tried to soften her face but succeeded only marginally. Well, Dr. Summer said after she'd checked Bella's data. Everything looks good from here. How do you feel, Bella? Like shit, Bella snapped. Edward hid his face behind his hands as he heard her answer and tone, but Dr. Summer just laughed. Yes, I guess that the heat isn't agreeing with you, right? Bella sighed deeply and the dark expression finally left her face. That's putting it lightly. I'm sweating like a pig and I feel disgusting. Moving is becoming a chore. I want this pregnancy to be over. The last part was wailed and Edward decided that it as safe to touch Bella, and grabbed her hand before he pressed a gentle kiss onto her cheek. Dr. Summer nodded. Sadly, that's normal. But on the positive side, you won't have to deal with this for much longer. Now, please loose your clothes so that I can check on the baby and have a look at the cervix. Bella nodded and quickly got ready. She hoped that Dr. Summer would tell her that the baby would be born soon. It didn't matter to her that she still had 3 weeks until her due date. Bella wanted her baby. Now, first Dr. Summer did an ultrasound and checked on the baby, which was very well developed. Before she asked Bella to put her feet up. By now, Bella didn't really care about this humiliating position any longer. Bella and Edward looked at each other while Dr. Summer did her job between Bella's legs. Well, the doctor announced after a few minutes, everything looks as it should and you will be pleased to hear that your cervix starting to open. I doubt that you'll make it to your due date. If I were to bet, I would say that this baby will be here in a week. Really? Bella cried out. She hadn't dared to really hope, but now that Dr. Summer had said it, she was smiling in anticipation. Yes, it looks like baby Cullen will make her grand entrance sometime this week. Dr. Summer talked to them for a few minutes and told them everything they needed to be prepared for. Before they left the practice, Dr. Summer handed them her personal number, just in case. The mood on the drive back couldn't have been more different. Both Bella and Edward were smiling from ear to ear and couldn't keep their hands from each other. The news that their baby would be there in just a week was thrilling. Are you happy that the baby will be with us soon? Edward asked Bella and rubbed her belly. Yes, especially because there isn't anything that needs to be done. The nursery is perfect and car seat and pram are also at home. All we need to do is making sure that Cullen Corp won't self-destruct while you're taking some time off. Edward nodded and promised to talk with everyone the next day. He and Bella had decided that Edward would stay with Bella for the first 2 weeks after the baby was born, and after that time he would only work a few hours a day for a while. Emmett and 2 very competent employees would make sure that everything would be running smoothly. Edward trusted them and knew that there wouldn't be any problems. Bella had talked with Ben and Angela a few months ago and they had agreed that Bella wouldn't work for the first 6 months and after that she would mostly work from home, but they would still meet to discuss the numbers and to decide which books they would publish. They were prepared for everything and ready for their daughter to be born. Nothing could go wrong. The excitement over the imminent birth of her daughter died a swift death when Bella realized that Edward had made sure that she wouldn't be left alone for longer than an hour. Either a friend or family member or Kate and Garrett were there to look after her. At first Bella found it sweet, but after the 3rd day she was ready to throw something heavy at someone. It got so bad that she did a huge tantrum and screamed at Edward and promised to cut his balls off if he didn't give her some breathing space. She also may have thrown a shoe at him. But it was a light shoe and didn't really hurt Edward when it hit him. It really didn't. The shoe throwing must have convinced him that it was better for him to tone it down. From then on it was enough for Edward to know that Kate or Garrett were nearby and that Bella would call them should she need them. Sadly, that didn't mean that Bella felt more comfortable in her own skin. It was still unbearably hot and even doing nothing made her sweat. She refused to wear anything but a panty and a huge t-shirt. Why is it so hot? Bella moaned while they sat in the shadows of their garden with a cold drink. I'm sure that it'll be colder soon, Edward tried to soothe her. It should rain sometime during the next 2 days. Hopefully, because otherwise I'm going to melt. Why did I have to be pregnant during the summer months? Edward did. Answer that question because Bella asked it nearly every day, and on some days even more than once. So Edward asked a different question. Do you have your bag for the hospital packed? Bella turned her head to him and gave him a look that made Edward feel really stupid. Of course, it is and has been in the closet near the front door for 3 weeks now. I'm no fool and well prepared. Sensing that he had somehow insulted her, he immediately backpedaled. I didn't mean that you weren't well prepared or anything of the sort, I'm just a little nervous. Apparently, that had been the right thing to say because Bella smiled and kissed him. I know, and I'm just as nervous, but there's nothing to worry about. Everything will be fine, you'll see. I'm sure you're right, Edward sighed. They eyed a few more hours outside before it got too hot, and they went inside, where Bella immediately grabbed her tablet and checked the website of the weather forecast. She was surprised to see that there was a severe thunderstorm alert for their region. To be sure, she looked at a few different sites and watched the news. Just as Bella was about to call to Edward, they heard a knock from the back door, and turned to see Garrett and Kate entering the house. "Hello, you two," Bella greeted them and offered them something to drink. "Thanks, Bella," Garrett said. "But we're here because of the thunderstorm alert." Edward looked confused, but Bella nodded. "Ah yes, I was just about to tell Edward." "Sounds serious." Garrett nodded. "Yes, it does. Kate and I already secured our own home and came here to help you." "That's nice," Bella said with a smile. She was thankful that Edward wouldn't have to do this on his own, as she couldn't help him. Edward thought so too and quickly went outside, where they brought their outside furniture into the pool house, and the potted plants, too. Inside, Kate and Bella searched for some candles and flashlights, just in case there would be a blackout. It wouldn't be the first time, and Bella wouldn't be surprised if they would spend the evening and night in the dark. After everything was taken care of, Kate and Garrett went back home, and Bella quickly prepared some light lunch and also dinner. Potato salad and meatballs was something that they could eat cold if they had to. During the day they kept checking the weather forecast, and the forecast only seemed to get worse. Thunderstorm, heavy rain and wind. Neither could believe that it would become that bad, but from one moment to the other the sky darkened and the wind picked up. Not 15 minutes later, they heard the first thunder and it started raining. Well, raining was putting it a little too lightly. It was as if someone had started the shower. "Wow," Bella breathed as she watched the spectacle from the living room windows. "I didn't expect it to be that bad. Or to be so sudden." She felt Edward stand behind her before she heard him. "I know, this looks like the end of the world." She giggled lightly. "Edward, don't be so dramatic. I'm sure it won't be the end." Arg. A sudden pain flashed through her stomach and she felt it harden. "Bella, what's wrong?" Bella heard Edward but ignored him in favor of breathing calmly through the pain. As sudden as it had started, the pain ended. Nothing is wrong, Edward. Just a cramp or something like that. Nothing to worry about." Edward wasn't too sure about that and hoped that this hadn't been her first contraction. It would be difficult to get Bella to the hospital in this weather. Neither Edward nor Bella wanted to read and decided to watch a movie. It was impossible to watch TV because of the storm, and from time to time they looked outside, where they could see branches and leaves flying around. "This is the worst thunderstorm I've witnessed in my life, and if the forecast is correct, then it'll get worse still," Bella said quietly as she stared out of the window and into the garden, where the beautiful garden was being destroyed. That's true." Bella was just about to say something when a strong cramp made her wince. "Ow, ow, ow." Edward was immediately by her side and rubbed her back. After about 20 seconds it was over and Bella breathed a sigh in relief. "Phew, that hurt. Do you think that maybe these cramps could be contractions?" Edward asked. "I don't think so," Bella commented. It wasn't the first time that she'd had cramps or contraction-like pains. And until these pains became regular she wouldn't start worrying. "But we'll just have to wait and see. If they are contractions then we'll know soon enough. Maybe, but don't you think it would be better to go to the hospital as soon as possible? It won't be easy to get through the storm." That wasn't something Bella had thought about yet and glanced outside with an uneasy feeling. "That may be right, but I don't think it matters much when we drive. They said that it would be dangerous to be outside. It would be best to call an ambulance." "True. Let's just hope that we won't." Bam! A loud thunder made them jump and then the lights went out. "Shit." Edward cursed and hurried to the breaker box, but there was nothing he could do. Bella looked out of windows and saw that Kate and Garrett's house was also dark. "The other house is also dark. Must be a blackout." "Yes," Edward agreed grudgingly. "Luckily we have enough candles and flashlights." Even Though it was unpractical that they didn't have any power, Bella thought it was somehow nice to sit in the dark with only a few candles. Well, it won't be that. Ugh. Bella felt like she'd peed herself and quickly looked down. Bella, what's the matter? I think I just lost some of my water. Or I peed myself, so really I hope it's the first, Bella whispered and stared at Edward with huge, shocked eyes. Edward stared back, his eyes even wider and fear clearly visible in his green orbs. Oh God, the baby's coming. My daughter. Shit, fuck, what do? We need to go to the hospital. Now. Bella watched as her husband panicked and ran around looking for a phone. Edward, the landline won't work because of the blackout, you'll have to try your smartphone. Yes, of course, the phone. He muttered under his breath and left the room. While Edward searched his phone, Bella decided it was a good idea to take her wet and really uncomfortable underwear off. Before she could go upstairs to grab an undersheet so she wouldn't ruin the furniture, Edward returned and he looked just as panicked as before. I've got no service, he wailed and grabbed his hair in agitation. What do we do now? Bella took a speed breath as she felt another contraction. By now she was sure that they were contractions and waited for it to be over before she looked at Edward. Grab a rain cloak and go to Garrett's. Bring him and Kate here. We're going to need their help, she snapped. Really? Would she have to think of everything on her own? Edward nodded and nearly ran out of the room. It was amazing how someone, who was normally so collected, could be so useless when people counted on him. It pissed Bella off, but it also gave her something to focus on, which helped her in turn to stay calm. And it wasn't as if she couldn't understand why he was too nervous. About 5 minutes later Edward returned with Garrett and Kate, who immediately went to Bella's side. How are you feeling? Well, it hurts but nothing I can't handle. I already lost some of the water, though. Garrett didn't look pleased as he heard that. That's not good. Edward turned to him and asked what Bella was thinking. Why? Is something wrong? Garrett shook his head but still looked tense. No, but I fear we won't be able to get Bella to a hospital in time. That caught Bella's attention and she demanded to know why. You see, Bella, for one we won't be able to get an ambulance because the phones aren't working and because of the weather. Some streets are flooded or blocked by trees. It seems that we'll have to deliver this baby here. What? Bella screamed and reached for her husband, who seemed to be just as unhappy about this development. I know that this isn't something you want to deal with now. But I think it's too dangerous to drive on our own. Especially when Bella is already losing her water. I don't care, Bella snapped. I want a hospital and Dr. Summer. I don't want to get my baby here. It shouldn't happen this way. I demand that you drive to a hospital this instant. Oh. Bella's surprised expression and the sound of water hitting the floor made everyone look down, and they saw Bella standing in a rather huge puddle. Well, Kate said after an uncomfortable pause. It's definitely too late to move her now. Edward, come with me and help me gather everything we're going to need for the birth. She didn't wait for Edward to react. Kate just dragged him with her and left Garrett alone with a shell-shocked Bella. Do you want to sit down? He asked her and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Still dazed, Bella nodded. Yes, that might be a good idea. I need something to clean up this mess though, and myself. Don't worry about that. I'm sure that Kate will bring something with her. This isn't the first time she's present at a home birth. I'm sure she knows what we're going to need. Finally the shocked expression left her face and Bella relaxed. That's good. I never researched home births and have no idea what we should need. Why does Kate know this though? I wasn't aware that she had some medical training. Garrett was pleased that Bella wasn't panicking and was instead distracting herself. Because of my job as a soldier I had some medical training. Can be quite handy, you know, and Kate decided that it would be a good idea to take some courses herself, especially when her cousin got pregnant and decided to deliver her baby at home. I'm thankful that at least someone has an inkling what we should do. Arg. A new, stronger contraction hit her and she quickly grabbed Garrett's hand to support herself. This time it lasted longer and Bella wished she'd laid down, but eventually it was over and Bella let go of the hand. Garrett stretched his fingers and gave Bella an appraising glance. For such a small and slender person, you're very strong. Ouch. Bella laughed. Don't be a baby. Okay, Bella, we have everything we should need, Kate announced. They returned and Bella was surprised to see that Kate must have left the house because her clothes were a little wet. At Bella's questioning look, she explained, I'd had to grab a few things from home. After that, Kate and Garrett prepared the ottoman for Bella, and the moment she laid down another contraction hit her. And this time Bella screamed. Ah, fuck, that hurts. I know, Bella, and I need to look how far dilated you are. Okay, Kate said. Bella grimaced at that. It now dawned her that Kate would see her vagina up close. It wasn't a pleasant thought, but someone had to, and she knew that Edward wouldn't be able to deal with it. Okay, she agreed and opened her legs to give Kate a better view. Well, it seems that your body is in quite a hurry to get your baby out. You're already halfway there. That's really fast. Uncommon. But not bad, right? Edward asked from his position next to Bella. No, but I think this will hurt a lot. At least that's what I was told. The birth should be quick but painful. And Bella won't be able to take something against it, Kate explained and smiled. I'm not sure that I like the sound of that, Bella commented. It was nice at the birth wouldn't take as long as she'd feared, but she was no fan of pain. Well, I guess it doesn't matter what I want. 3 hours. It took 3 more hours before Bella was fully dilated, and she'd hated every minute of it. At first it had only hurt a bit and only for a few moments, but after the first hour she'd felt like something was trying to rip herself apart. They had been unable to contact anyone as they still didn't have any power and the cell phones weren't working. And because of the still ongoing storm, it was too dangerous to leave the house. And that meant that the 4 had to do the job alone. Never had Bella been so thankful that Garrett was an ex-soldier and therefore very hard to ruffle. Without him, Edward would have made Bella crazy, but Garrett knew just when to take him away for a little moment and when to tell him to man up. Kate was also a godsend. She monitored the situation as good as she could and distracted Bella whenever the pain became too much. But now, not even the best stories were able to calm Bella. Okay, Bella, you're ready to start pushing. It's going to hurt like hell, but think of your little baby, Kate instructed. A few seconds later, their contraction hit Bella and Kate ordered her to push. The first 3 times she managed to stay silent, but she did her best to crush Edward's hand. He was crying. Ow. Fuck. Bella, I didn't know you had that much strength. Shut up, Edward. How would you feel if you were trying to push an orange out of your cock? Bella snapped with a menacing glare and enjoyed to see both men wince. Garrett's hand twitched to his LTTLE soldier and Bella sneered at them. Chicken. Honestly, you too, Kate complained. You should be lucky that women have to give birth, or mankind would have died out long ago. So much for being the stronger sex. Bella managed to smile before she had to push again. Arg, that hurts so fucking much. She couldn't remember one sane reason why she'd wanted to have a baby. Why any woman would be willing to put herself through this ordeal. And some not just once but several times. Just so you know, Edward, this is going to be our only child. Or we'll have to find a way for you to carry it. Edward didn't mention the impossibility of the second option because he was too focused on Bella and on suffering with her. Of course, he'd known that childbirth was painful, but to know something and to see something with your own eyes was something completely different, and he was just thankful that he couldn't see between Bella's legs. Once this is over, I'm going to apologize to Emmett, Edward promised silently and winced when Bella grabbed his hand especially hard. You're doing so well, Bella, Kate said from between her legs. Just a few more and your baby should be here. Garrett, take Bella's other hand and both you and Edward should give her legs some leverage. How? Garrett asked as he grabbed Bella's hand and she immediately tried to squash his. Either let her put her feet against you or grab her tights, Kate explained distractedly. Edward and Garrett shared an uncomfortable look, but neither man would say anything against either woman at the moment and just did as they were told to. They grabbed her legs not 1 second too early. Bella used that extra hold when the strongest contraction hit her to push the head of the baby out. The head is there, Bella. Just one more time and you'll be a mother. Bella didn't give any indication that she'd heard Kate, she just pushed with all her remaining strength. And then, "Stop, Bella," Kate yelled and suddenly the first cry of the newest Cullen member was heard. Bella collapsed back as she heard that and happy tears filled her eyes as she listened to Kate announce that her daughter was there. Edward was asked to cut the cord, which he did with trembling fingers, before he grabbed Bella's face and kissed first her cheeks and then her smiling lips. "Our baby is here, Bella, and she's so beautiful," Edward whispered. "Really?" "Of course," Kate said and handed her the still screaming baby. "Congratulations." "Thanks," Bella said, but she had only eyes for her little princess. "Hello Ella, I'm your mummy and I love you so much." Neither parent noticed that Garrett was taking pictures of the first moments as a family. Bella also didn't feel Kate cleaning her up and covering her with a light blanket. There were more important things to care about. But the happy bubble burst when Bella felt belly contracting. "Kate, I feel another contraction," Bella said and looked at her friend with growing panic, but Kate seemed completely calm. "That's okay," Kate said. "Did you forget that you also had to push out the afterbirth?" Bella grimaced. Yes, she had. Pouting, she handed Edward her daughter, who was to clean her and to get her dresses. Edward blanched but did turn towards a small table where they'd set up a changing area for the baby. Garrett went with him to help while Kate took care of Bella. Half an hour later Bella and Ella were cleaned up and resting. Edward laid beside his wife and stared at his daughter in wonder. He just wanted to settle down for a quick nap himself when Garrett came to him. "I just tried calling the hospital from my cell phone and it worked. Dr. Summer said that they would be here as soon as possible but that it would take some time." "Well, there's no hurry now. But I think I should try calling my family." Garrett smiled and handed him his phone. "Good idea." Edward dialed the number of his father's phone and waited. Carlisle answered after the second ring. "Edward." The reception was bad but good enough to have quick conversation. "Hey Dad, is Mom with you?" "Yes, and most of the others." "Are you okay? The storm is terrible and I was unable to reach you. Your mother and I were worried." Edward smiled at his father's concern. "We're all right, but please put me on speaker phone. I have to tell you all something." "Okay," Carlisle said. It was obvious that this request confused him, but he did it without hesitating. "Everyone can hear you now." "Hello everyone," Edward greeted his family with a smile on his. "I just wanted to tell you that there's one more Cullen now. An hour ago Bella gave birth to our wonderful daughter Ella Louise." Dr. Summer arrived with an ambulance about an hour later, cursing the weather and glowering, but that changed as soon as she saw Bella and little Ella. Well, she said as she took the baby from its mother to examine it. "You did a really good job. Her skin has a beautiful and healthy color. I'm going to examine her now and make sure that the little princess is perfectly healthy." Bella nodded and she and Edward watched the doctor with eagle eyes while she measured and weighted the little baby. Luckily they had a baby scale at home which Dr. Summer could use. After all her reflexes were checked and everything was documented, she handed Ella back to her father. "Ella is perfect. Everything is as it should be, and now I'll take a look at Mommy here." Bella grimaced. "Okay, but I'm glad when these frequent exams are over. I so hate them." Dr. Summer laughed. "I'm happy that giving birth hasn't changed you. But I hope you remember that I'll still have to see you for a few ones. Just to be sure that everything is healing nicely." That wasn't something Bella wanted to think about, but she knew there was no way around them. And so she just sighed and let Dr. Summer do her job. To the immense relief of Edward and the other people in the room, Dr. Summer was very satisfied with the way things were, and after she'd made sure that Bella and Edward knew what to expect from the next few weeks, and after she'd shown Bella how to breastfeed little Ella, she congratulated them once again and left. Bella and Edward stayed awake long enough to feed their daughter and to put her to bed before Edward carried Bella to bed and collapsed next to her. The storm lasted for nearly 36 hours, and after it was over, the inhabitants of the two houses were shocked by the state of their gardens. Kate was near tears when she saw her destroyed flower beds, and Edward and Garrett knew that they would have to clean up soon. But other than a few fallen branches and some loose clapboards, nothing was damaged. They counted themselves lucky, because they knew that others had lost their houses. It was a good thing that the surrounding trees had protected the property from the worst and that the houses were solidly built. Belle wasn't really faced by any of this. All she could think about was her daughter and how perfect she was. And how much her fucking abdomen hurt. Walking the stairs was nearly impossible, and often she was carried by Edward. Luckily she could still take her beloved ibuprofen, or she would have been unhappy. Predictably, the family and their friends arrived as soon as they could. Which was as soon as the streets were cleared. Kate had foreseen such an invasion and had prepared enough food to feed a small army. The first to arrive were Jane and Felix, who arrived 2 days after Ella had been born. It was just before lunchtime when Garrett announced their guests. "Edward, Bella, the first wave of guests are rolling in," he said, and both Edward and Bella had to smile at that. It was kind of fitting. Jane didn't wait to be let in and just opened the door herself. She ignored her husband's rebuke that she was being rude. Peef, this was her best friend's house and she'd just birthed her godchild. There was no doubt in Jane's mind that she would be the girl's godmother. The happy parents and Ella were awaiting their guests in the living room, and Bella didn't even try to keep Jane from Ella. "Oh my God," Jane squealed after she'd positioned Ella comfortably in her arms. "She's so beautiful. You'll have to beat the boy's back with a bat when she hits puberty," Edward said. Man growled. "Don't even joke about that, Jane. As far as I'm concerned, she'll stay my little girl for at least 20 years. Jane and Bella laughed at that. Both knew that Ella was a looker. Her skin was pale but with a lovely pink touch. For a baby she had a lot of hair already. It was no surprise though that she had curls. Both Edward and Bella had had curls as babies, but no one could predict the color of the eyes or hair. For now though, her eyes were the usual baby blue and the hair was of a light chocolate brown. Yes, she was indeed a beautiful baby. So all joking aside, I'm Ella's godmother, right? Edward and Bella shared amused smiles. Of course, Bella had wanted to name her oldest friend godmother. But it was just so Jane that she didn't ask and just assumed. "Well, just for your impertinence, I should say that we've chosen someone else," Edward threatened. "But that would be a lie." "Ha," Jane crowed and turned to Felix. "See, didn't I tell you that I would be the little princess's godmother?" "I never doubted that," Felix admitted and smiled as he watched his wife with a baby. Maybe it was time to have the baby talk. Edward could just shake his head. Jane was really something else, and that made her so special. Bella was also amused but thought it was best to talk to Ella's other godparent. "Edward," Bella whispered to get Edward's attention. "Shouldn't we speak to someone else now that Jane knows that she's Ella's godmother?" First he looked confused, but then he nodded and helped Bella to her feet. They asked Jane and Felix to entertain their baby while they went to have a quick talk with someone. They knew where they would find the other two who were in the house, and quickly, or as quickly as Bella could, walked to the kitchen. Kate stood at the stove and was humming under her breath while she heated some vegetable soup. Garrett was watching her with a content smile on his face, but he, like the ex-soldier that he was, noticed the couple's entrance immediately and asked if they needed something. "In a way, yes," Edward sighed. "Bella and I wanted to ask you something, Garrett." Garrett and Kate shared a confused look. "Well, ask away." "You see, when we talked about Ella's godparents, it was clear that Jane would be godmother because of her close relata. On to Bella, and because she is just plain scary, but then we had to choose a godfather. That choice was more difficult, and even though I love Jasper like a brother, I'm pretty sure that he'll be her UNCLE soon enough, and I wanted someone that could protect her from anything and anyone. There's only one that fits that description." Apparently, Edward had said enough to give Garrett and Kate a clue about what he and Bella wanted to ask, and their faces showed their surprise. Garrett, Bella and I would love if you would become Ella's godfather. Really? Bella giggled a little at Garrett's shell-shocked expression. It wasn't every day that you managed to shock Garrett. Of course, we're sure. You stopped being just a bodyguard long ago, and both Edward and I consider you and Kate part of our family. Well, Garrett needed a few tries before he managed to say, yes, I would love to be Ella's godfather. Wow, that was surprising. Kate was happy that they would have a big part in little Ella's life, and Bella thought that now was the perfect opportunity to take some pictures of Ella with her new godparents and their spouses. The moment that was done, they heard the approaching cars of the sea. Ullens and Bella decided it would be stupid to put the camera away when she would need document the first meeting of Ella with her family. As expected, Esme and the other women had spent the rest of the afternoon cooing over little Ella, and Carlyle had shed a few tears when Edward had put his granddaughter in his shaking arms. Not that Carlyle had been the only one to cry. Esme and Elizabeth were on cloud nine and were certain that there had never been a more beautiful baby in the Cullen family. Alice had pouted a little at that, but not even she could deny that Ella was a true beauty. As Bella and Edward had enjoyed their family's visit, they were happy when they finally departed so that they could rest. It was 7:30 when the new parents decided it was the perfect time to retire, because Ella, no matter how cute she was one demanding baby. Bella had to feed her every 3 to 4 hours, and she didn't care to be patient when she was hungry. Edward tried to help as much as possible, but he simply wasn't able to feed her. He didn't have breasts, and secondly, Ella didn't want the bottle. And no matter what they tried, the little demon wouldn't let herself be persuaded. Therefore Bella had to get up at all hours to feed the monster, but she loved her anyway. Well, maybe she loved her a little less at 4 o'clock in the morning, but only a little bit. The Saint weeks with Ella were wonderful, and both Edward and Bella enjoyed their time together, but soon it was time for Edward to go back to work, and that meant that Bella would be on her own with Ella. Well, not entirely on her own, as Kate would help Bella as much as she wanted, but that didn't change that Ella couldn't be fed by anyone but Bella, and the little princess still demanded milk every 3 or 4 hours. At first Bella had no problem with getting little sleep, but after a month she was exhausted. Dr. Summer had promised her that Ella would soon sleep longer and not demand milk so often, but until then she would have to deal with it somehow. Ella was 5 weeks old when Bella started to feel pain in her right breast. At first it was only a little uncomfortable, but soon she dreaded letting her daughter near them. It was Wednesday and Edward was at work when Kate, who knew about the problem, had enough. Okay, put on some shoes, Bella, we're going to see Dr. Summer, Kate ordered an SNA. TCHED Ella from her confused mother to get her ready for the little trip. What? Bella didn't really know what was happening, but decided to heed Kate's orders. 10 minutes later everyone was ready in. Kate had even managed to get hold of Dr. Summer, who was awaiting them at the practice. Luckily it was a slow day at the practice, and Bella needed to wait only 15 minutes before she was called in. Dr. Summer was already at the exam room and asked them. Bella had asked Kate to come in with her, what the problem was. My right breast hurts. Especially when I'm feeding Ella. I'm sure it's not, but Kate thought it would be best if you would take a look at it. As usual Bella tried to downplay her pain, but Kate wouldn't let her. That's an understatement, Kate contradicted her and ignored Bella's betrayed look. She cringes when Ella starts crying, and I think Ella feels that Bella is in pain. She hasn't been drinking as much as she normally does. Dr. Summer nodded and made some notes before she looked at Bella. Is that right, Bella? I need to know how it is. Bella fidgeted under the doctor's stern gaze and nodded meekly. Yes, it is that bad. It hurts so much, and if Ella would let me, I would just give her the bottle, but she hates that. Well, it's secondary if Ella hates that. Now, please, take off your shirt and bra so that I can examine the breast. Bella did just that, and although Dr. Summer was very gentle, she flinched often and grimaced when the doctor touched a very painful part. Dr. Summer said. Okay. I'm pretty sure about the reason behind your pain I still need some blood from you to make sure. Bella bit her lip uncertainly but decided to ask. Is it bad? Oh no, you have a mastitis. A breast infection. That isn't too bad but uncomfortable. Your temperature is a little high and there is a little lump but you can continue to breastfeed if it isn't too uncomfortable. Seeing Bella's grimace, she quickly offered another option. Or you stop. Until you feel better, but to relieve engorgement or to prevent loss of your milk supply, you'll have to use a breast pump. Both options don't sound good, but will it be safe to continue breastfeeding while I'm taking medication? Dr. Summer nodded resolutely. Of course, and it's the best option. The antibiotics should make you feel better in 2 days. At the latest. That didn't sound too bad in Bella's opinion, and after Dr. Summer had handed her the prescription, she thanked her and they left the practice. Kate quickly drove to the next drugstore to get Bella her antibiotics and then they were on the way back. By the time they arrived home, Edward was already there and quite worried about why there wasn't anyone home. As soon as the 2 women and 1 baby entered the house, Edward nearly ran to them and asked where they'd been. Bella calmly explained and assured her worried husband that no, it wasn't something bad and no, she didn't have to stop breastfeeding if she didn't want to. As promised, the antibiotics did help and soon Bella was again looking forward to her bonding time while feeding her daughter, and Edward did have his own bonding time. He had claimed bathing duties and enjoyed every minute of it. And he loved to take his daughter outside for long walks every day. Edward knew that Bella knew that he was acting strange, but that didn't matter. It was high time that he took his wife out for a nice dinner. Since Ella's birth they hadn't left her alone. Not even once, and Edward wanted to change that. Kate and Garrett had promised to watch the little girl for a few hours so that they could eat dinner at Bella's favorite Chinese. That was only possible because Ella was now sleeping much longer at night and only needed to be fed around midnight, and that left them enough time for a little date. It was a Friday and Edward came home early to tell Bella of his plans. He'd just put his shoes away when Bella came to greet him. Hey, Edward, what are you doing home already? Edward smiled when he saw that Bella was carrying his daughter. Well, we have plans tonight. Plans that don't involve this little bundle of joy, he said teasingly and tickled Ella's stomach lightly, which made her giggle. Edward, I can't leave Ella at home. I need to feed her, Bella commented. I'm not a fool, but if you feed her at 7 then we have enough time to eat at China Wu before she needs to be fed again. He'd foreseen that Bella would be reluctant to leave her baby. Emmett and his parents had warned him that young mothers were sometimes clingy. But who would watch her? We can't just leave her with anybody, Bella said and pressed Ella's body closer to her chest. Edward rolled his eyes at her feeble objection. Kate and Garrett offered to watch. I wouldn't call them unfit or unprepared. Would you? Knowing that Edward was right and that Ella would perfectly safe with one set of godparents, she sighed in defeat. You're right, but don't be cross with me if I call to check on her. Often. I wouldn't dream of it, he answered and reached for his little girl. And now give me Ella so that we can have some father-daughter time and you can get yourself ready. At 5. RST Bella appeared to be reluctant, but then an excited smile made its appearance and she quickly walked upstairs to make herself pretty for her husband. While he went to his daily walk with his daughter, Bella showered and shaved. After she was clean, she put on some light makeup and selected some on her black maternity pants. Yes, she still wore them because they were comfortable and fit, and a dark blue tunic with silver ornaments on it. Edward loved it and always complimented her when she wore it. Instead of wearing some high heels, she chose her favorite ballerina flats. When she was done, she examined her reflection in the mirror and was satisfied. She did look good, especially for someone who'd given birth to a baby 9 weeks ago. When she descended the stairs, Kate and Garrett were already there and both told her how fantastic she looked, but nothing they said compared to her husband's smoldering eyes as they racked over her body. Mrs. Cullen, you look entirely too sexy for a mom, he growled teasingly when he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her deeply. There was no mistaking that Edward still desired his wife very much. Stop teasing me and hand me my baby so that I can feed her, or we won't be able to go to China Wu after all," Bella said laughingly. Predictably, Bella had some trouble leaving Ella with Kate and Garrett, but after several promises to call should Summit be wrong and some reassurances that Ella would be absolutely fine, Edward managed to get Bella into the car and soon they were driving to China Wu. The drive took a little over 20 minutes and their favorite table was waiting for them when they arrived. Bella loved the restaurant because it didn't only have Chinese dishes but also several Thai ones. She especially loved the curries, and as always they took the buffet. The waiters knew the Cullens by now and didn't bring the menus any longer. They just asked about their drinks. At first Bella took a dish of mini spring rolls. She absolutely loved them, especially with sambal oelek. Edward could only wonder how she could eat so hot stuff, but he didn't comment on it. He also didn't comment on the amount Bella ate. He knew that Wome and who were breastfeeding needed the calories, and more importantly, he wouldn't dare say anything that could be seen as criticizing her figure. Bella hated that she still looked about 4 months pregnant, but she knew that it took time to lose the weight. Well, unless she wanted to start working out like crazy, which she didn't. They spent nearly 3 hours at the restaurant and talked about everything and nothing. Edward encouraged her to take Ella to Phoenix, so that the staff would see her and so that Bella could see how things were running. She immediately agreed, and Edward could see how much she'd missed going to Phoenix. On the way home they shared few innocent and not so innocent touches, and as soon as they'd arrived home, they thanked Kate and Garrett for babysitting and complimented them outside. After they'd locked the door, they went upstairs and Bella fed Ella while Edward sat at her feet and watched her with burning eyes. Until now Bella's libido had been asleep, but now it was back, and she hoped that Ella would sleep long enough for Mommy and Daddy to have some sex. Her desire must have been visible because Edward smirked at her and left a few minutes before Bella. When she stepped into their bedroom, she noticed that Edward had used his time wisely. He'd lit a few candles and already turned down the bed, but most importantly he'd already lost most of his clothes. Only his boxers were still on, and they did little to conceal Edward's desire. At the sight of this Bella felt suddenly a little shy, which was irrational because Edward saw her naked every day, but that had been in a non-sexual way. Edward must have sensed this because he wrapped his arms around her and pressed her to his chest. "I'm not going to tell you that it's silly to feel shy all of a sudden. You know that already, but let me tell you that I still find you very sexy, and I've waited as patiently as I could for you to be ready. And should you still have any doubts about my feelings, then my very hard dick should be enough to convince you that I'm ready to explore your body and to bring us both pleasure. And lots of it." While he'd spoken he'd let his hands wander, and by now Bella felt the familiar tingle in her lower regions, and it didn't matter anymore that she still needed to lose about 12 pounds or that the skin on her stomach was rather flappy. She wanted her husband, and he wanted her. Their first union since the birth of Ella was gentle, and Edward took his time to pleasure Bella in every way before he sank into her warm depths. It was different but the same. And after they'd come down from their high, they fell asleep with happy smiles on their faces. Until Ella once again demanded their attention. The next day they spent at home and both did a little work while Ella played in her playpen. It was just after 3 when the doorbell rang. Confused as they weren't expecting anyone, Edward got up and opened the door. Outside stood an old man in his late 70s with light silver hair and friendly brown eyes. "Uncle Harold." Edward greeted the man with a friendly hug and invited him inside. Uncle Harold wasn't related to the Cullens, but he was an old friend of Edward Sr. Bella, who knew Uncle Harold only fleetingly, offered him some tea before they sat down. Harold Martins watched the little family and had to hide a smile. Edward Sr. had been smarter than anyone had known. After a few minutes of small talk, Edward decided to ask about the reason for his visit. Harold didn't spend much time around Boston anymore, and for him to come there meant that he had something to do. "Not that I'm not happy about your visit, but I'm surprised. You spent most of your time in England now. So why are you here?" Bella tried to admonish him, but Harold just laughed. "You're one smart man, Edward. Very much like you, grandfather. You're right though. I came here for a reason. As you know, I was Ed's lawyer. Edward nodded. I know that he sometimes worked with you. Mostly personal matters. Yes, that's right. I was also the one who wrote the will and the contract between him and Mr. Swan. Now Edward and Bella were all ears. Until now no one had been able to tell them why he'd chosen Bella and to arrange the marriage. Harold noticed their interest and put an envelope of the inside pocket of his jacket. Your grandfather knew that he didn't have much time left and made sure that everything was taken care of. Shortly before his death he handed me a letter to you and asked me to give it to you. But only after some time had passed. He told me I would know when the time was right. With these words he handed the letter to Edward, who stared at it with shocked but also curious eyes. Read it or don't, but remember that he loved you dearly and only wanted the best for you. Harold then stood up and left them alone. Bella was also shocked but brought Harold to the door before she returned to Edward, who was still staring at the letter. Edward, do you want to read it alone? Startled, Edward looked up and shook his head. No, Bella, please stay here. You've got as much right to read it than I do. Of course, Bella said and sat next to over Busband and put a calming hand on his back. Edward took a deep shaking breath before they opened the envelope and pulled out his grandfather's letter. He recognized his writing immediately, and it even still smelled like him. He took some courage, but he did read it. My beloved Edward, I'm sure that you're surprised to get this letter, but I thought it best to leave some kind of explanation behind. I can only imagine your face, but it must look interesting. Well, I guess you were very angry when you heard the stipulations of my will, but I did it for you. I loathed that woman that tried to ensnare you. She wanted your money and your connections but didn't really care for you. Not that you did. I knew you good enough to know that you used her as a way to let go and to sow your oats. If you remember, I told you that you would to that eventually, but I regress. She wasn't right for you and I wanted her gone and you to be happy, but it seemed that you hadn't met the right woman yet. And that's when I remembered a certain party. You were 10, I think. We were at one of those horrible parties with too many people who thought they deserved only the best. You were bored and decided to explore the vast gardens of the mansion. It had a maze. There you met a girl about your age. She wore an expensive pale blue dress. It had some stains on it. She was a beautiful girl and she seemed to be in her own world where there were fairies and other creatures. At first you only stood there and stared at her. It was endearing to watch you. But then you straightened your posture and approached her. I didn't hear what you were saying, but she wasn't impressed. The look on your face was hilarious. Most people, even children, knew who you were and tried to be nice to you for one reason or another. This girl though was different. At some point she even stuck out her tongue. You were shocked by her actions and about ready to give up, but then she offered her hand and dragged you into the maze. I didn't see you for the rest of the party, but when it was time to leave you were smiling because you had had such a great time. I asked after her name and guess what she was called? Bella. Edward and Bella stared at each other in shock. Do you remember this day? Bella asked. I was sure that we never really had spent time together. Edward shook his head and both continued to read the letter that proved to be very interesting. You were completely enamored with her, and when it was time to go to bed you told me this was the girl you would marry someday. I have to admit that I was shocked, but pleasantly so. The next day you tried to find her but were unable to. You were sad but easily distracted. I didn't think of this day for a few years, but then Tanya Denali entered our lives and you began your affair. I started looking for Bella and imagine my surprise when I found out that she was Isabella Swan. I never liked the Swans, social climbers and the most conceited people I'd ever met. I see. Couldn't believe that such a family should have managed to create the lovely creature that you'd found so charming. Well, after I'd found out her name, I arranged a meeting between her and myself at a park. I was incognito. It was very exciting. Bella was still lovely and very down to earth. Smart and caring. She was your perfect match. The problem was that you wouldn't see it that way, and I knew just how stubborn you could be. That's when I remembered my own father's scheme. I never told your grandmother any of this as she wouldn't have agreed with me. I decided to make it a stipulation of my will for you to marry. Of course I gathered some intelligence and what I found was not good. The Swans were even worse than I'd expected. They didn't acre for Bella and were ready to use them. She needed to be freed of them. I talked to Jeffrey Swan and he was all too pleased about my plan and promised to speak to his daughter. It was disgusting how easy it was to arrange this marriage. A verdict. Hing was arranged, but I also made sure that neither of you would be caught in a loveless marriage. Harold was to keep tabs on you, and if it seemed that my plan didn't work, then he should reveal my second will. Well, it's mostly a time-delayed addition to my will. Should neither of you been happy or really unwilling to make a marriage work, then you would have still been able to become my successor. And Bella would have been free of her family. I know you're most likely very angry with me, but I did this to make you happy. I never wanted to hurt you, and maybe I take things a little too far, but I really believe that you and Bella can be as happy as I was with your grandmother. I love you, Edward, shall pray for your happiness. Pops. For a few minutes Bella and Edward remained silent and stared at the letter with unseeing eyes. It was Edward though who broke the silence first. It was still wrong of him to do play without lives like this. Yes, but I think that somehow he knew that. From what you've told me, he was an intelligent man. I wouldn't be surprised if he left Mr. Martins more instructions than he admitted in this letter, Bella said. She was still shocked about the revelations somehow she couldn't be really angry with the manipulative old man. Maybe, but I doubt Uncle Harold would admit it. Not if my grandfather had asked him to stay silent, he wondered. Restless he streaked up and paced through the living room. I can't believe this. This old bastard. Bella watched him for a few moments before she got up and wrapped her arms around him. Edward immediately relaxed and buried his face in her hair to inhale her familiar perfume. I know you're angry, but you have to admit that the man was right. Even if it took us a while, we're very happy now. And I wouldn't change a thing. Yes, we are, and neither would I. And I'm pretty sure the old man is watching us and looking smug. Bella was smiling like a loon. Today was a great day. And the person next to her thought the same. Maggie Hughes was sitting to Bella's left and looked like she was about to start dancing. The women and their entourage waited until they were alone before Bella and Maggie threw their arms around the other and started squealing and jumping up and down. They made a very funny picture. Oh my fucking God, Maggie shouted when she finally released Bella from the embrace. Tears were running down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. I can't believe that this is really happening. It's like a dream. Bella nodded. I can understand you, Maggie. This is a first for me too. Normally I don't talk with the really big bosses. Well, you sold yourself pretty good, Maggie's agent, Siobhan, added. You impressed me. Blushing, Bella smiled shyly. Oh well, this meeting was one of the most important ones I've ever had. But the contracts are signed now and soon we'll be making a shitload of money. Let's go celebrate. Bella had every reason to be happy. Today she and Maggie had signed the contracts with Warner Brothers. Soon after the second book of Inheritance of Light had been released, movie studios had come knocking at their doors. The books were ridiculously successful and they'd sold millions of copies. That success had brought Phoenix lots of publicity and attention. And new authors and books. By now Phoenix had made its own name and Bella, Angela and Ben were making good money. Never had Bella thought that their little publishing house would ever become this successful. It felt good that Bella and her friends had managed to get this far. Edward was sitting in his office at Cullen Corp. And looking through some papers, but still managed to keep an eye on his daughter. Ella was now 3 years old and would soon start going to preschool, something that excited Ella to no end. Everyone she met was told about that. Luckily most people loved Ella, and weren't bothered when she stopped at their workplaces to talk to them. At first there had been some raised eyebrows. Because Edward sometimes took his little princess to work with him, but he proved that he was still a tough businessman and not someone to be trifled with. It wasn't always easy to handle work and their little girl, especially because neither wanted to hire a nanny, but they made it work. "Daddy," came a soft voice from sitting area in his office. Edward smiled as he heard his little princess, who was drawing a picture for her mommy. "Yes, Ella, will mommy be home for Thanksgiving?" Ah, he should have known that Ella would ask that question. Bella had been gone for 1 week now and both, father and daughter, wanted her home. "Yes, she will. Mommy promised, remember?" Ella nodded. "I know, but it's important that mommy be there at the party. Mommy have something to tell us." Edward frowned a little at that. It wasn't unusual for Ella to say strange things, but this time she was adamant that Bella had to say something to the family. Beside the deal with Warner Brothers. Well, he wouldn't have to wait long because tomorrow was Thanksgiving. But he was curious nonetheless. The sound of the door opening caused Edward to turn around. He was about to snap at whoever it was, but dark brown curls stopped him. He wasn't the only one who'd noticed their guest, and Ella immediately raced across the room and into her mother's arms. "Mommy." Laughing, Bella picked her up and crushed her to her chest. "Hey, Ella, I missed you so much. Were you a good girl?" For a 3-year-old, Ella could look exasperated like a teen. "Of course. And I didn't tell Daddy your secret." Bella looked confused and a little shocked, but quickly blanked her face. "Well, that's good." Noticing that Bella wanted to change the subject, Edward asked after her trip. Bella smiled mysteriously but just shook her head. "You'll have to wait until tomorrow." Edward glared at his scheming wife, but over 4 years of marriage had taught him when to push and when to let it go. This time he had to let it go, and so he opened his arms and smiled when Bella sat down on his lap. With their daughter. The next day the Cullens vacated their homes and relocated to Cullen Manor. Bella and Kate spent the morning in the kitchen and prepared a true feast. And at midday Bella called everyone to the table. The family was impressed by the food, but before they could start eating, something that Emmett and his son were eager to do. They had to say what they were thankful for. Bella watched her family and couldn't be happier. Esme and Carlisle were still the happy couple that Bella knew them to be, and Nana enjoyed living with them. She spent most of her days organizing the different events at the manor. Rose and Emmett were trying for baby number 2 and enjoying it. Henry was his father's son. A huge teddy bear with a black hole for a stomach, whose best friend was his cousin Ella. Alice had finally managed to get Jasper to make an honest woman out of her, and even if she and Bella would never be best friends, they were friendly now. Angela and Ben had decided to spend this year's Thanksgiving with the Cullens, much to the displeasure of the Webbers. Both were very happy and not planning to have a child for another 2 years. Felix, on the other hand, had managed to impregnate Jane and to survive her moods. Their daughter Felicia was 14 months old and a diva. Felix worshipped the ground his baby walked. Dion and their sex life was as extravagant as ever. Bella was brought out of her thoughts when Edward nudged her side to mention that it was her turn. Bella stuttered and couldn't find the right words. She'd planned this, but now she couldn't get her mouth to work. "Mommy," Ella complained and rolled her eyes. "Oh well, I guess I goes first. I'm thankful for my doggy Dobby and for my new bike. Oh, and for my brother that is in Mommy's belly." Ella looked very pleased with herself, especially because everyone was staring at her. Edward felt like someone had punched him. Shaking, he too RNED to Bella and opened his mouth to speak. It took him 3 tries until he managed to form a coherent and audible sentence. "Bella, are you pregnant?" His wife, whose face was a deep crimson red, smiled sheepishly at him. Surprise. Edward didn't know what caused it. Maybe it was the shock that his daughter, who shouldn't even know where babies came from, had announced it, or that they hadn't even talked about a second baby yet. All he knew was that Emmett, heck, no one would ever let him forget what happened next. He fainted. Just before he lost consciousness, he could have sworn that he'd heard the amused and happy laughter of his grandfather. The end. Thanks for watching.